Do you like wrestling trivia? Then check out the 5-Star Match Game, the Pro Wrestling Quiz Show. I'm Joe Gagney, and every episode, I grill 3 contestants with 5 rounds of power-packed wrestling trivia. We have over 30 evergreen episodes in the archives covering WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, and much, 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 much more. Play along at home and check it out today.
Hey everybody, my name is Jesse Collings, and I am the host of the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, a show right here on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. On the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, we take a deep look at individual issues and stories that are going on in the wrestling world. Each episode is about a different topic, and we take a thorough and educated look at things ranging from current booking trends to breakdowns on individual performers and angles to investigations into different fan cultures across the industry. In addition, we keep a close eye on the wrestling media, and as a professional journalist, I bring a unique perspective to how current issues in wrestling are being covered and discussed through the wrestling media. We have a revolving series of guests from across wrestling punditry joining us on each episode, and we hope that you make the choice to give us a listen on wherever you get your podcast from. Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings, and joining me once again, returning to the show, she is the co-host of the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. She's a rabbit herder. She conducts the train, and she is our Greater Manchester correspondent. It's Trish from Trish and Sarah. Trish, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for having me back. I thought you probably had enough the first time, so it's almost a surprise for to call us back. But no, thank you for having me.
To paint a visual, Trish looks like she's sitting on a bench at a train station right now while she's recording this podcast.
I'm not good with tech. Everybody knows I'm not good with tech, and I don't know what's happening. But it's a good job we don't have video on this one, so we're all good.
And she is wearing looks like what appears to be a Portsmouth zip-up. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's my friend Kazo's favorite thing actually is like I have to take it to Japan, he said last year. So but I'm always in some sort of football gear, I guess, or rugby league, so that's not that unusual. So.
And how are things going for our lads on the South Coast?
Not very good. Yeah, I was going to try and avoid that actually a little bit.
Tends to be that way.
Yeah, no, booed off at halftime and at full time on Saturday, so I wouldn't call that great bottom 3 in a championship. So yeah, needs some turning around now. But that's football, isn't it? You know, and championship's a tough league. So we'll see how we go. You don't do doom at Christmas, not with Portsmouth. They're escape merchants for their entire history practically. So yeah, we'll see where we are come March, April.
Yes,
and I'll see how dooming I'm going to be.
Yes, things aren't going great for my team either, but we don't have to talk about that at the moment.
Oh, you are your normal inconsistent selves, aren't you? So yeah.
I would actually argue we've been very consistent this season.
Consistently poor.
We've been consistently. I mean, I watch all the games, and I think the form doesn't waver that much. It's for some reason they scored a lot of goals at the start of the season. We're like, oh yeah, Thomas Frank, very pragmatic, and then just ever since about mid-October, they've just decided they really only have like 2 players on the team that actually pass the ball forward. They seem beleaguered and under pressure by pretty much any side, regardless of quality. And our center backs score all our goals.
Yep. There was a season with Man United Women where they had a centre midfielder who was supposed to be the transitional player, because transition's like the go-to word in women's football these days. And every time she got the ball, it went backwards. And like it used to drive me absolutely insane. Like even now, like when I see her, she's playing for London City Lionesses now, and even now when I see her, I'm like, everything goes backwards. Like, what do you do? So yeah, no, it's always an issue if your centre backs are your top goal scorers, and you know that the team's got no kind of fluidity to it currently. But hey, yeah, it's football, isn't it? Rough and smooth, and always more rough unless you support certain clubs, but that's part of the I think that's part of the attraction sometimes. Well, especially as British people, we like suffering, you know. It's
there's a revelation in the misery.
Indeed, yeah.
And there are when clubs have good times, there's always a segment of the fan base that's never really comfortable with the team being good. They just want the team to be bad because it makes them feel more comfortable.
There's times as well where you're like, you're 4-0 up and you're like, it's going to let it slip in a minute. You're going to do something in a minute because you're just so used to that. So yeah, there's an element of disbelief when your team is doing good if you don't if you're not glory hunting, shall we say, and jumping on whichever team is the best over that period of time. So
How serious of that is an issue in England?
I think
Because I
it depends on the city. So I mean, I grew up in Portsmouth, and Portsmouth is very much one of those cities where if you come from there, that's your club. You don't see half as many Arsenal, Man City, Man United, whoever football shirts in that city as you do other places. But if you go to places that don't really have as much of that connection, especially like the joke was always around Guildford with Man United, but places like that, then you'll see a lot of kind of the big Premier League teams, and you will see it swap. You will see it change. You don't see as many Manchester United shirts
Mhm.
now as you did, 20 years ago. You'll see far more Man City shirts, far more Liverpool shirts, and Arsenal are kind of like the semi-cool team sometimes, I guess, for picking up a team. But yeah, you will see far more of that in those sort of towns and far less in places like Sheffield or Portsmouth or things like
S-
that with the
s-
kind of long.
So very off-topic discussion point here.
Yeah, yeah.
As the gap really grows between the top 12 or so clubs in England and even further below that, like, do you think you'll see like a club like Portsmouth now, which is in a very different state maybe than when you were a child in terms of its like ability to compete for top trophies and things like that. Um, do you think that will grow as fans kind of maybe they support Portsmouth, but they also support like another team?
Possibly. I think, the way that people consume stuff now is what makes it change. You can look at it differently because things like the championship are so much more accessible now with TV than they were like
Hmm.
even 20 years ago. So maybe people growing up will see it as a league. I just think it's a live element. So if you get people when they're young and you get them into the games and that sort of thing, they're much more likely to become attached to that whole experience. Whereas if they're just consuming it through the TV, then maybe they're not going to go so much for local element. And that's a wrestling thing too, isn't it? I think you get so much more loyalty if you can get people to go to shows and kind of invest in that way. Which is challenged these days by the fact they want you to be TV consumers first. So yeah, I still think if you take, especially kids, so you get them into the game there, that they'll kind of buy into that loyalty. If you don't, yeah, they're much more likely to go, you know what, maybe I want to support something that wins. I want that instant gratification. Maybe
Yeah,
that's where things have changed.
I
Yeah.
guess my point would be like as teams that are playing in the championship or lower um becomes much more difficult for them to compete with bigger clubs, especially the longer that they're there for. Um, like
I don't
fans will
know.
you'll
We've
become a
kind
ch
of gone the opposite, I think. I think
I
we've gone
mean
the opposite.
in some regards that's probably true, but it just seems to me like I'd be worried about like if you're a supporter of a team that's from a smaller city that has a maybe not a champion but a league maybe a League One side maybe a League Two side
Hmm.
you can you can realistically like oh I will support um just thinking of Crew Alexandra just to throw out a random like football league side and I'll also support Arsenal just as an example to kind of like you can still be a big fan of Crew Alexandra. You can go to the games, you could watch every game on TV or the games you don't go to, but you could also realistically support, a Big Six side without really having to worry about your loyalties ever really overlapping. I don't know how frowned upon that would be in England, but it would sound like something that might be possible.
It's something
Um,
that actually used to happen more. So you'll find that people in like 70s, 80s, there were a lot of clubs they go and watch, I don't know, Man City on one weekend, and then if they're not playing, they'll go to Rochdale or Bury or something like that. So that used to be more common in some ways than it is now. Yeah, I think it's it's possible. It's weird to see how the game progresses because when you look down the leagues now, we've got so many more owners, massive owners in League One and
mhm.
Championship than we had way more than even 10 years ago. So it's kind of there is that's probably the bigger thing, is that it's such a difference between like the kind of the haves and the have-nots, in that regard, and that makes it more difficult. You look at a club like Morecambe, who nearly went bust this season, and it's like they are just supported by the local community, and if you don't have that kind of outside backing, then your reach and everything else and your ability to compete in your own market, which is essentially what we're talking about, I guess, is restricted. So
Mhm.
yeah, it just depends how much the that kind of reach goes down into the game, and it's different here because it's not the same in France and it's not the same in Spain, where the lower leagues are a lot of B-sides for like Barcelona, Real Madrid, and that
Mhm.
sort of thing dominating. So yeah, I think it is slightly different in terms of here, but it's something to keep an eye on, I guess. Maybe we'll see more of that culture. I haven't really seen it yet, but then I live in one of the biggest footballing cities in the country, and I come from a city that treats it very differently. So maybe I see it different if I live in a Milton Keynes, or I'm picking on cities now, or a Guildford,
Yeah,
or
you really gave it to Milton Keynes there. Yeah, I
hey,
mean they're a particularly interesting example though in term relevant to the
yeah,
culture, the football culture for their club is very different than for pretty much any other club.
them and Salford City are
Mhm.
both
Oop, we may have
interesting
lost.
examples that when you go, yeah, just I don't think I'll ever go back to Salford City. I just found it very, very strange feeling. Um, which is weird. But if you compare it to like Bury, who got knocked down to like the very lowest league in below the football league, and we just don't have that same concept, I don't feel.
Well, Gentlemen's Wrestling Podcast, the podcast that buries Salford City the most.
They deserve it. They deserve it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so I want to have Trish on the show because I came up with a list of the biggest wrestling stories of 2025. I think I'm going to tweak it a little bit, Trish. I said this was
Okay.
the biggest wrestling stories. I'm going to change the conversation to most interesting wrestling stories. If only because that allows me to be a little bit more um, subjective in what we include here and not. Because I
Cool.
was thinking about this and I was thinking like, like the ongoing WWE lawsuits, whether it's the shareholders lawsuit or it's regarding the potential case with um, the Vince McMahon sex abuse allegations and things like that. Those are probably like really like important, and I don't want
Hmm.
to ignore them necessarily, but I don't really have a ton to say on them currently. And the developments over the course of 2025 have not been, I think, like, I don't want to say not important, but not really super discussion worthy as opposed to previously. So, this is the most interesting topics, and by that I mean the most interesting topics that I want to talk about. Um, and so I came up with a list, and interestingly enough, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, I shared with you, like, oh, here's the list that I'm thinking of. And one of the topics that I mentioned was TNA and WWE's relationship as one of the topics. And lo and behold, overnight we get this story that TNA now has a significant television deal coming, which is that they're going to be on AMC starting, I believe, on January 15th, 2026. And this will be easily their biggest distribution in the United States since they were on Spike TV, which is 15 years ago almost. It's more like 10 years ago, but still.
10. Yeah.
Um, so it is big news for TNA, and I think what TNA and Impact have been able to do this year is worth a discussion, and obviously the fact that we're getting for all of the, I guess I'll say to start, for all of the bemoaning that we have about uh, big data and television ratings for wrestling, and our WWE's business partners disappointed with how that they have started under their new deals this year. Is Turner worried about, or Warner Bros. Discovery, or whoever buys Warner Bros. Discovery, concerned about AEW's television ratings? In the midst of all that, we now have another wrestling company getting a weekly television show on a cable network that is in most American cable subscribers. And that, if anything, would be a real sign of the health of the industry, that there is at least enough interest to give TNA another shot on major American cable television. And I think that's worth definitely celebrating in some ways and definitely monitoring going forward in terms of the overall health of the wrestling business.
Yeah, so this one was I always feel like we owe Carlos Silva a slight apology in some ways because
We all laughed at him.
we did all laugh at him. We all mocked him a little bit, and it's like it's going, it's coming. And obviously, when it didn't come around for their return to TV after their kind of 1 month break, we kind of thought, oh, is this actually going to happen? And then the AMC story came out, and now we have the deal that they have. And it's a really interesting one in terms of it's not on the CW, which was what a lot of people expected in wrestling on Wednesday nights. So the fact that it's on AMC, which is, you can still look at connections to WWE in some ways in terms of that being owned by the Dolan family and their connections for MSG who've just signed a deal with WWE. But the fact that it's not on CW is interesting itself, and NXT is probably the thing that's taken the most hit out of the big Data Plus panel, and the only one where we've had a network actually come out and kind of raise points about that data system. But also, it's a case of TNA. The biggest thing is about TNA managing to increase its exposure. So you've practically doubled the amount of homes that the show is now going to be available in on a weekly basis, and then it's a case of we don't know the value yet. So I guess that's a big question as well. Is the suggested that from anyone I've spoken to has been 10 million a year over 3 years, which is what Carlos Silva said that he wanted, wasn't it? He said he wanted 10 million a year would be enough to help them kind of become more financially viable. So in that regard, the fact that he's managed to get this deal across the line, when we've seen how many companies have we seen try to get deals outside, and up to now, AEW's kind of been like the one off, hasn't it? So it is a pretty big achievement. The big questions I have on this is, so it looks like their taping structure. So Carlos Silva on Ariel Helwani's show earlier today was talking about, live more at the start, but eventually it kind of be like we tape 2 and live 1, which is similar to what we do now. So my big questions are, how does that affect, therefore, anything to do with the talent structure? Are there going to be more pay? Is there going to be more benefits? So we're still going to see kind of wrestlers having to pay for their own kind of injuries, treatments, and that sort of thing? So is it going to become more like a third major US wrestling company in terms of how it treats its employees and its independent contractors? And how can it sustain? So the the programming that it will replace does an average of 0.04 on that slot. So is TNA viable in that slot? We'll probably start there because I'm going to run away with that one.
Well, I have a few things I think is worth monitoring, especially as we're looking into 2026, is what is TNA going to be as like a wrestling product next year? And you touched on it talking about like what's the talent structure going to be like? Are they really going to be like a third major company?
Yep.
I would say like they have had I would say like a really mixed year in 2025 in terms of I think they've had some successes and they've also had some notable flops.
Yep.
I think, they've had this relationship with WWE and NXT. They have had some of their wrestlers appear regularly on NXT to the degree that they've basically become NXT wrestlers, people like a Joe Hendry. Are those people going to be back in TNA? Are they going to be headed towards NXT like a lot of people thought they were going to? There was a rumor going around that this was going to be the end of the WWE and TNA relationship, but that has been subsequently denied by TNA, at least saying that's going to continue. And I wonder, like, I don't think like you have a real opportunity here on that, the January 15th show to get people who are probably know what TNA is and maybe have watched it over the course of its past, 23 years of existence or what kind of product are you going to present to those people that makes them interested and to keep watching after they originally sample your first show? And I think that is something that the company really is going to have to figure out. And is it going to be a company that focuses on like NXT talent and be NXT wrestlers? Is it going to be a promotion that focuses on the Hardy Boys, or older WWE established talent? Is it going to be focusing on younger talent? What's even available to them? Because I think that's the big challenge. Is if okay, they've got a TV deal, they maybe have some money to either retain or acquire some wrestling talent. But what wrestling talent is out there that TNA could go after that would be a real asset for them in the short term and the long term? Is it going to be, I think, I mean, I think it would be a mistake to be like, yeah, we're going to build this around Nick Nemeth, or we're going to build this around, and which is, the TNA history is like, let's build it around some overexposed older WWE wrestler that has diminishing value. But the way that the independents are, the way that the environment is for getting young talent, and the lack of young, exciting talents that is available on the independents right now that have the kind of polish you would want to see out of wrestlers appearing on national television, it is a real question about what that product is going to look like. I don't think anyone, even TNA's fiercest fans will tell you this, but regular TNA fans will say that the creative end of TNA has not been very impressive over the last year. And I don't think they can present the product, the same product they presented this year to a larger audience in 2026 and expect really positive results from that.
It's one of those things where you can potentially throw names from NXT or ex TNA names if you can get them for WWE on the first few shows. But yeah, you're right. In terms of longer term, they need more than that. And I think when you look back at how AEW debuted, they had some big ex-WWE names. Chris Jericho was their main TV draw. The Hardys is tending to operate as the known name so far. If you look at like their promo package that AMC put out, it's just like full of the Hardy Boys. But you also need to have people that are recognizable that can draw numbers, but maybe are not overexposed. And that's where like John Moxley was great in that aspect, because although he'd been on WWE TV, it was a different character. People don't invest in. And then you need to have the kind of interest in, yeah, that younger talent that you can grow with, that then you can associate with the brand, which is when AEW started, you had Private Party in the tag tournament. You had Paige and MJF come through. You had Britt Baker. You had these people that were like, oh, we've not seen you before. Jurassic Express, all of this, and we're going to attack. Darby Allin, yeah, great one. You were going to attach yourselves to these people just as much as maybe if you're an older wrestling fan, you may tune in to see, the Chris Jericho's, the Cody Rhodes of the world. So yeah, you do need that balance. And it's not just a case of who can you pick up and how much limited that is. They've also got names listed on their kind of press release. If we have this, we have that, like we have Mustafa Ali, but it's like he's contracts you up at the end of this year. And this is where the budget thing comes in, because you look at the month they have off, and one of the things that Fightful have said, like one of that part of was kind of thinking about budget. So what is their budget? Do they have a budget? Even if you're only going live so many times a year, that's still a bigger financial implications than if you're taping all the time. And so I guess it's more not just kind of what's available, but what do you have the money for? And is this a real investment, or is this just something that kind of sustains you at the level that you're at currently? And then, yeah, does that work for TV? Will that work for past? You probably do well on the debut. That's pretty that's always tends to be the biggest show for any company, doesn't it, when they debut on a new network or TV? But it's like, how do you sustain that? Where are you going to be after week 4, week 6, week 12? And do you have enough for that? I did think they would do the Mike Santana winning the belt back thing. I thought when he lost the belt, I thought, okay, that's what they want to do for the debut. I think I wrote it in our newsletter as well. And even though the way they did that makes no sense at all and probably put a lot of like poor will towards the company, they think, oh, we have this big moment on our debut show, but that's a moment. It's not. That's where, yeah, you're right about the creative, that needs investment in, because the moments only last so long. They only, and you can do shock and awe, you can do all those things, but people invest in characters that they can associate with and want to see how they develop in the stories. And if it feels like they've seen it before, or there's no one worth investing in, then things will come away very quickly. What do you think about NXT talent being kind of more consistently involved going forward? Because I think there's maybe a risk to NXT in terms of basically feeling like them having 2 nights a week of products. It's kind of like when AEW added Collision, and then it kind of Collision fell away quite quickly on the second night, and it did take a little bit away from Dynamite.
I mean, in theory, I think you have so many of these people in WWE's Performance Center and NXT that you're training and don't have the time to give them on-screen experience, basically. Especially as NXT has shifted more in the past year into being a very veteran-heavy show. And even the wrestlers that you have organically created, like an Obafemi type, he's been on TV for a couple years. Like, he's not really they're not a veteran performer necessarily, but they're not like this brand new person with under a year of experience. So having another outlet that's like its own television show that maybe is a little stylistically diverse from what you're teaching NXT would be beneficial to these talents. I think that there's room for NXT to be there. I think if you're TNA, it's really difficult. You have to be careful with, you don't want to be seen as NXT's B show. Um, it's, I think, been overall a benefit to them that they've had this WWE partnership, to a degree, but it's also a very one-sided partnership when you look at who gets to hold their titles, who gets to win their matches, who gets to appear on their major pay-per-views and get squashed in a quick second, even if they're the world champion. Um, so I think that's a challenge. I think that the real challenge for TNA, the unique challenge for TNA, I think, is that when they come in January, they're going to have a lot of people like myself who are going to be pretty cynical about what the product is because I know what TNA is. I, like many wrestling fans, went through my own TNA experience where I got interested in the promotion and then ultimately disappointed by it. And they have a lot of, unlike, say, an AEW, which was debuting and nobody kind of knew what to expect, and people are like, what is this going to be, this new wrestling company? A lot of people are going to be tuning into that TNA debut, and they're going to be like, all right, I hope it's not LOL TNA. And I think that's a challenging hurdle for them to overcome because I think that's why I think the product has to be like really different, and something really that catches the attention of fans because there's a lot of cynicism towards what TNA can be as a wrestling product, and they really need to do a good job showing that audience that's sampling the product that this is different than what you thought TNA was.
I think it's hard as well because I think you will get an element of people that come back under the nostalgia, like, oh, I remember TNA on Spike or wherever. So you're probably going to be servicing them more in the first couple of weeks. And also, having the older names is servicing the TV networks in the first couple of weeks as well. So there's kind of a mixture of her approach of kind of thing. But yeah, it's what's a middle to long term plan? Short term, first couple of weeks, I won't even really look at those figures too much in general. And it's like, where do you go from here? How much talent are you going to have? Are you going to contract more? And then are you going to visually do anything different? TNA isn't the most visually kind of captivating production generally. And will you be able to make that look bigger? Will you be able to make it look more, not mainstream, but more kind of TV ready, I guess. In the same way that, they have to do with AEW. And now when we go to the kind of the residency shows, it's kind of a struggle, right? Because you're used to that production. So are they going to do anything that makes it feel different, or will it just feel like another level of NXT? And that's probably a big challenge. The Curtis Caldwell Center is a good looking venue, so that's a good place to start. They did a good crowd there earlier this year when they were last there, so that should be somewhere that they can do good business in. And yeah, I think they're giving themselves the best shot by staying on Thursday nights as well, and not having that head-to-head competition and being used just simply as a pawn for WWE. But my other thing is if you look at somebody you want to build that product around, you look at someone like Leon Slater, who's contracted through fall of next year, and you think that's a perfect person. But they're the people that are most likely to be picked up by WWE in this kind of food chain. And that could be a difficulty. Is like that's the difference between them and AEW in some aspects, is that you may still be a transition to WWE in far more of a way than AEW ever was. So if someone just gets invested and then they go, how healthy is that? But these are all long, middle to long term things. I think that's just the way my brain thinks. But they need to get that first impression right as well.
Yeah, shifting to another topic, one of the ones I think is definitely really relevant is the big data and the way that we look at wrestling ratings. And that is something that really exploded kind of over the fall with this kind of revelation that uh, wrestling shows were not doing as well as maybe we thought they were. But I don't think that's necessarily the main takeaway, because I think what I think big data ultimately says to us is that this is continuing a trend that's been happening for the last several years, where wrestling companies and entertainment in general is shifting away from Nielsen ratings and what they look at as relevant. And it's not that they ever all agreed on Nielsen ratings, but just in general, the entire television industry, when you combine the big data, you combine all these streaming services that choose to calculate their ratings in different ways and nobody really knows how to evaluate them, is that we're heading in towards a system where ultimately we're really going to have just no trust in at least the data that we're told and what we see as a public. Really no trust in what is a good number, what is a bad number. Is this doing well? Is this doing poorly? And I think that has a big change in wrestling rhetoric and conversation. I'm grateful for AEW going to doing the hybrid Mac, AEW on Max versus AEW just on cable, because I think it's thankfully ended a lot of the week to week doom and gloom that we or overreactions or whatever that we had whenever that rating would come out on Thursday afternoon and be like, oh, it's great, oh, it's bad, oh, belt up this guy, oh, take the belt off this guy. Like all of that stuff has been kind of moved away because it's becoming more and more difficult for us to understand what wrestling companies are doing good and poorly, especially between, in AEW's case, the shift to the kind of hybrid streaming slash live cable, and then in WWE's case, Raw going to Netflix, and that being just kind of this black box that nobody really trusts in terms of the information we get. And I think that's an important topic for this year.
Yeah, and when it comes to on Netflix, you've only got to look at the difference between the calculations that Brandon Thurston and Dave Meltzer do to see how difficult it is to actually know how many kind of people are watching. But it's a case of when it comes down to big panel plus data and the hybrid thing, is we don't quite know how that system works. We don't quite know how it's being calculated. There's some questions about calculations in terms of that. Is it the case that wrestling has been less popular over the last 20 years than what we thought? We don't know. But you've touched on something where I've tried to hammer home a little bit this year as well on the two things I've tried to hammer home. And it's like, as much as the traditional method of measuring TV is important, what is more valuable when it comes to streaming properties is how loyal are the people that are watching your product, because this is where the pay-per-view thing comes in. One of the big reasons that AEW got the deal that they did currently is they were able to display through different sets of data. I know Tony Khan's spoken about a lot, that AEW fans are more loyal than most other sports or all other sports kind of properties. And that means that not only will they kind of watch the product maybe when it's on, TNT, TBS, but they're also going to, if you offer them the option on Max, they're more likely to subscribe to Max. If you offer them the pay-per-views on discount, they're more likely to do that. That's why they built the pay-per-view platform on HBO Max for them. So it's kind of like you demonstrate your value in different ways. And I think Nick Khan was very much ahead of the game when he talked about splitting properties between streaming and traditional and everything like that, because we are in a transitional period and we are seeing more movement towards kind of streaming and maybe not watching as much live. I bring up the example of we have the Celebrity Traitors show, biggest show in the UK this year. And that one where they got to finale, you've got the BBC, obviously biggest linear broadcasting network that we have. And they're advertising not watch on BBC One, which is their main channel, but watch on iPlayer. And most people, that I'm speaking to are consuming that product on the kind of the iPlayer, on the streaming option. So it made me think like in the past we wouldn't have seen that. So there's definitely that movement, and it's hard because we're in a transitional period. Everyone wants to make massive conclusions. I think you're definitely right on that, and it's much more difficult to do so. So then we've had examples of people like making up stuff, especially now we lost like quarter hours and stuff to try and justify things, and it's like you can't do that. Like you can look at these and take it as a guideline, but we won't really know the value of something now until like deals like what we talked about with the TNA deal are made, and then forthcoming eventually with the next kind of AEW deals and the WWE deals are coming. So it's different, and it's because it's not so black and white and we can't make the quick comparisons, it becomes more difficult to analyze, and that's what leads to people kind of making quick judgments in that regard. But yeah, I do think that AEW proved kind of themselves against these things by having the Max deal. That was probably the biggest thing. When we look back on it, I think that will be the biggest thing that came out of that TV deal signing, compared to anything else. Not even like the financial figures. I think making sure they were on Max and having that pay-per-view element and be able to display growth so far with their pay-per-views and Max, if that continues, will be more important to them going forward than perhaps their TV numbers are.
Yeah, honestly, I welcome this change just because I think my mind finally broke when I at some point during when I was co-hosting WrestleNomics, where I'm just like,
Oh, yeah.
I'm much more in line with the Tunnel Talk host than I ever was before in terms of just like I'm so done with numbers. I'm so done with I understand business analysis is like really important, but man, I just want to watch this wrestling shows and have opinions on it. Can we get back to that? So I'm kind of all for just this era where we're just clapping our hands together and throwing them up and being like, look, I don't know what's as I throw cat hair all over my room as I demonstrate my point. Uh, uh, I don't know what we're we don't know any of these numbers, so I guess we can't really analyze anything based off of them. I guess we still have live attendance as a go-to, but I welcome more confusion about numbers, if I'm being honest. I know it's not great for like transparency reasons, but we're trending towards this as an entertainment society in general. Like how many views did Stranger Things do like the last week? Like we don't know. Like Netflix says like 59 million minutes of it were watched or whatever. But like, what does that really mean? Like, are people really watching it? Is it on in the background? Like all this kind of stuff about viewership and stuff like that is fascinating. From like a culture perspective, but I'm glad that we live in a world where it's no longer we're no longer having that Thursday afternoon, like, okay, now we got to make a jump to conclusion about the entire company or product based on whatever this rating was. Um,
It's so funny to think about because before the AEW NXT stuff, I don't feel like that really happened. Like we saw, like we'd look at trends across what was happening, especially with like the decline of Raw and Raw, especially like 2016, 2017. But I don't feel like we had the conversations until they were kind of put into the limelight with AEW NXT. And then yeah, every Thursday, yours is 4 p.m., ours is like 9 p.m. That thing would come out and it would just be like insane. And we almost went, I think this is a cultural thing as well, and I look at the kind of 20 late 2010s into the early part of this decade, and we kind of went for a thing where you had very, your information was very centered, so you got centered news through one or two outlets on TV or whatever, and that's what you consumed. And then when it came to like social media and YouTube and everything like that, it was like we had this massive burst of information that you could easily access in a way that you couldn't previously. And now it kind of feels like we're siloing back away from that and information is more protected. That's my kind of cultural feeling. And I feel like that when it comes to numbers in general, not just wrestling, but in general now. So it's like everything is becoming more secretive and contained again. And it feels like that we've kind of come to the end of that cycle.
yeah, definitely like the streaming wars and how many people are actually watching things on streaming and how they've chosen to calculate. Uh, it's always, even under the Nielsen system, it was always a very inexact science, and it's only continuing to
Mm.
do so. And now that you have all of these different companies that are having all these streaming companies, and they all have their independent streaming services, and they're trying to convince their shareholders that the streaming service is a great idea and it's going to be lasting in the long term. All like to be very secretive about their numbers because it really doesn't, even if the numbers are relatively good, it really doesn't behoove them to really be super transparent about it because what if the numbers aren't good? What if a show flops? What if this happens? What if that happens? And um, kind of Switching to another topic, I think another major story, WWE. Um, Making what I would consider to be two like really major like partnership changes in terms of where the product is being distributed. We saw Raw debut on Netflix at the start of the year, and so we're now about 1 year into that whole new era. And then we also saw WWE, leave Peacock. And for most reasons, in particular, their PLEs switching from Peacock to now being and part of WWE, ESPN Plus and ESPN's streaming service. Um, and those are two major changes. I think it's Raw is no longer on linear cable. It is on a streaming service. Um, what changes have that had to the product? Is Netflix excited about what Raw has done? We don't, I think again, since the data that we have for that is so scattered, it's hard to really say. Um, and then in addition, we now have WWE really doubling down as a major media partner now with ESPN, something that I feel like they've long tried to do and have long aimed to be. And now we fully see it. If you watch any ESPN show or product, you're seeing um, advertisements for WWE. I was watching a Celtics game this last week, and Mark Jones, who's one of my least favorite NBA commentators, was doing a live read for Survivor Series, and I was like, "This is a personal, like this is like my personal hell." Is like listening to Mark Jones and his forced, style of commentary, doing a live read for WWE Survivor Series.
Was it as bad as the old Fox Sports ones for NFL, where they used to
Well,
like
yeah, well,
butcher the
Joe Buck
names?
would just be mad, which ironically, Joe Buck now works for ESPN and probably has to do
Okay.
WWE reads still. Um, it's worse than that because Joe Buck just sounds bored, but that's how he kind of always sounds. Mark Jones is more
Mm.
like he's trying to be like this hip, cool commentator making fun turns of phrases, but once you kind of realize that he's like really cheesy and he's forcing it. You can't stop. You can't not hear it. And now when he's talking about Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar being locked inside war games. I'm like, oh my God, please stop talking. I'm already annoyed by this. Um, but it's a major deal for them being on ESPN. Um, and what kind of exposure? I think this is the big question with WWE is we saw this when they went to Fox. There was this huge uh, anticipation from the stock market that being on Fox would help WWE become more popular to gain more casual viewers because it was such a bigger network than the cable stations that they had been on prior to that, and that they would get live reads during NFL football on Sundays when tens of millions of people are watching, and that never really happened. They debuted on Fox and nothing really changed. They did see an increase in popularity several years after that, but I think those are for reasons largely unconnected to the fact that SmackDown was on Fox. Um, and instead, and so now we're kind of replaying that in 2025 because, being on Netflix is huge. Being on that Netflix carousel, WWE Raw, when people turn on Netflix, is very valuable real estate. Um, uh, there was a great episode of Barry, which I don't know if you ever watched Barry, the HBO show, but one of the characters is like a television show creator, and she launches a show on a streaming service, and it gets in the carousel, and she's like, "Oh my God, it's in the carousel!" And then it gets taken out of the carousel like 45 minutes later, and then when she contacts the streaming service, she's like, "Oh yeah, our algorithm didn't really like that show, so we took it out of the carousel." And her show is basically DOA because it's not in that carousel at the start. And I feel like that might be the case with Raw. I don't have Netflix, so I don't like open up the app a lot and see it if it's on or not. So I can't really report how big of a presence WWE has on Netflix right now. Um, it's kind of interesting that Netflix didn't end up with the streaming services, the PLEs, when those became up for sale. Uh, and then obviously being partners with ESPN and being part of this ESPN Plus package. ESPN is the biggest sports news service in the country, if not the world. It is controls a lot of the way a lot of sports viewers and sports fans consume media. So how valuable is it getting WWE on there? Still all things to be decided, but definitely a major storyline of 2025 and beyond.
So I do have Netflix, and I will tell you that the PLEs will show up occasionally, more in the kind of upcoming shows, but it doesn't appear on my carousel because I don't watch it. So that is something. So what I thought was really interesting, a couple of things with Netflix this year was one when they released their figures that the first event on there, the Royal Rumble, was actually much bigger than WrestleMania. And normally, traditionally we'd expect that to be the other way around, which shows you the impact of having like the first month and then the push that they have. And they don't really push it after that. And that's not probably that unusual for Netflix because they are very much a here and now content sort of thing. So if you have like a weekly thing, that's never going to be as big as, the new release of a season of Stranger Things or Drive to Survive or, whichever latest
Hmm.
documentary we've got. So that makes sense to me. What I found really interesting in terms of, yeah, we don't know how they value them. The first probably big opportunity they will know is when their kind of 5-year get out clause comes up. But what I did find interesting is not just that they didn't pick up the PLEs, which now you'd actually think would be more that they're after, but the fact they're changing their strategy to more like an Amazon style strategy where they don't feel like they need to have everything. So WWE was their kind of, last big purchase of we need the entire of a property. So we're going to buy the entire overall, but now it's very much like we're happy to have bits and pieces or the big shows, in the same way that Amazon have traditionally worked of having a sample of having a bit of everything sort of thing. So that's what they talked about with UFC, that they were happy to they wanted to bid for the UFC pay-per-views, but they didn't want everything else that come with it, and UFC decided to go with Paramount, so they had somebody that wanted their entire kind of library and catalog and everything else. So it's that I found was quite interesting. So that is a big change in the way that they look at products, and you have to wonder how much of an impact Raw has had on that, being that that's their only kind of weekly live sports entertainment platform. So that is something I kind of keep in my back of my mind. The ESPN deal. So this is harder for us because we get the pay-per-views for us and a lot of other places come through Netflix.
Hmm.
There is an argument in terms of that going on Netflix that for some countries, especially, they've lost a kind of viewership. So especially like places like India or something that don't have the kind of Netflix level consumption, which is one of the reasons they're supposed to be there to attract. Be interested to see what their subscriber numbers are at the end of the year in places like that to see if we can see any impact. But with ESPN, so yeah, we don't feel any of that media coverage, outside of the US. So I know when I'm in the US, I watch a fair bit of ESPN. I know it's not as watched by especially younger demographics as it once was, but we don't feel that. And I know that they've finally kind of started to fully advertise. Survivor Series was more heavily pushed than either WrestlePalooza was or Crown Jewel. So, but have you found it interesting that they've not released kind of any numbers, especially after the big push that they had for Survivor Series? I thought we might see something. And there seems to be kind of nothing, no, not even a press release kind of dressing up. I don't know, like whatever numbers they want to throw out there. Because like we've seen with Netflix, especially with their boxing this year, you can fly whatever numbers you want, you know. But yeah, I am surprised. Are you surprised in the same way, especially considering how many ESPN like football numbers I see, that they haven't put anything out there?
I think if it was a huge success, we'd be hearing all about the numbers
Mm.
that they did, is my takeaway from that. Um, I think earlier this, last week, Burke Magnus, who's ESPN's president, was on Jimmy Trania's podcast, and he discussed about WWE, their
Yes.
events being on ESPN as part of this ESPN Plus, service that they kind of launched or repackaged and launched. And he said basically like, WrestlePalooza, that was an event that had never been done before. It was a new event with, real no name value. So, and then of course we had the Crown Jewel show, which was in Saudi Arabia, which it wasn't, it was in Australia, but he thought, he maybe isn't doesn't have his finger on the pulse of where all these things are, but that's okay. He's a busy guy. Um,
told two of my Australian friends to get new passports.
yeah,
So
but he's after he's after we had those two shows and those were those shows, but Survivor Series is a good idea of where we're going to be at because it's a
hmm.
legacy pay-per-view show, which to me when I saw that I was like, okay, disappointed in WrestlePalooza and disappointed in Crown Jewel. And the excuse is WrestlePalooza has no name value or anything like that, which is very interesting given on what some other WWE comments have been in terms of we want to start new pay-per-views. We don't want to be married to the WWE Vince McMahon named pay-per-views. So WrestlePalooza is going to be a big annual show, allegedly. We'll see how that goes. Um, and then but Survivor Series is Survivor Series. It's been going on for over 30 years. So what is um, Survivor Series? How did that do? We don't know. Um, it's very interesting. I think it's again fortuitous timing for WWE that they had the their pay-per-views, their live event, their PLEs were their contract was up and they had a chance to negotiate with ESPN, which at the same time was really looking at launching this aggressive new direct-to-consumer package where you no longer need to be a cable subscriber to get ESPN if you're paying for this premium service. And this is one of those things that, in addition, you can get with that. And so WWE is being seen as a major, like almost like a loss leader for ESPN. It's like this is one of the big things we're going to have when we're pushing this service. A lot of how successful of a move this is for WWE beyond just the financial of what they've gotten out of the deal is going to determine on how successful this is as a endeavor for ESPN. If ESPN is really successful in launching this, WWE becomes a perhaps a major pillar on this, post-cable defining streaming service. If not, we'll see. I think it's interesting. Like WWE was in a similar position with Peacock when Peacock was first launching. Peacock said, "All right, we'll give WWE a lot of money. We'll take their pay-per-views, we'll basically absorb the WWE network and its subscriber base in theory to our new streaming service to help it get off the ground." And I don't know how successful that was for Peacock, but I thought it was interesting that Peacock ultimately, experimented with WWE. They had the WWE live events airing live on Peacock and all this stuff. And then when the contract came to NBC said, "Thanks WWE, we're gonna, replace you with real sports, right? We're gonna go get the NBA. We're gonna go get the MLB. We're gonna have football, simulcast streamed, NFL football simulcast between NBC and Peacock." So the Premier League and WWE were kind of like the first kind of experiments for NBC, and they've stuck with the Premier League, but they said, we're going to move on to real sports. And I do wonder, like, is WWE a test for this ESPN premium service? And if it becomes successful, do they move on from WWE, or their focus shifts? Maybe they still have WWE, but it's like the eighth most important thing on that service.
That's kind of a nice time with like AMC with TNA, isn't it? Is it like, you looking at that? Is that a similar deal that you're looking? Are you experimenting? Are you looking to then move on to something else? But with WWE have been the kings of falling upwards, haven't they? With these TV deals, like they seem to not get offers from their previous partners, whether that's been Fox or another from Peacock at the same level, and yet they seem to find something better. But that doesn't. I don't see how that continues to happen at this point. And I think that maybe is one of the reasons why they went with such a long contract with Netflix, like a long-term security, because one, you don't know what everything's going to look like in 10 years, but two, like how many people have you realistically got to go back to look for additional value from? This ESPN app, that's an interesting one in itself, because the way they talked about it, especially Mark Shapiro when they signed the deal, it wasn't about keeping, like traditional ESPN viewers about adding WWE. It was about attracting people that wouldn't traditionally purchase ESPN. Mainly looking at younger demographics and looking at more female demographics. And I wonder how much they have seen a transition of people like who they wouldn't expect to purchase these things. Will people become more selective? Will it be a case of, okay, maybe I just do like you would with, and this is what we do traditionally with like things like Netflix anyway, isn't it? Is that you have that churn rate. So we'll come in for WrestleMania and we'll come away, but they want you to come every month for their big event. And will people do that? Or even will we see more use of the kind of the VPN and people going for the Netflix option? Because Netflix don't care, if you use a VPN, they don't care where in the world you're from, really. So because that's a better kind of price point. And I guess that's the thing. So we've got all these streaming services and we have this expansion of how much you're paying if you want more than one. rather than the kind of the multitudinal way that we had cable. And eventually it feels like all these things will go kind of back together, and that will provide less options for people to kind of get their content on, perhaps. So it's just how that develops. But yeah, I'm amazed in some ways of how they've managed to fall upwards so incredibly, considering that every partner they seem to work with, there seems to be kind of issues, or they don't want to renew. And even now, like you look at the Comcast with the USA deal, we know we've got Saturday night's main event is now a Peacock special. That's another one where we've seen
Well,
that kind of movement.
they're not alone in being a major content producing organization that has really benefited from all of these
No,
businesses throwing money at television show creators and um, all the various companies, whether they're producing sports or they're producing anything else, like they've all been benefiting from this race to get people to switch to streaming and get on board with new services. And WWE in that case is a good partner because they can legitimately demonstrate they have a loyal fan base that will
mm,
start getting invested in they will sign up for Peacock if that's where the pay-per-views are. And the whole other thing that you kind of touched on briefly is like WWE really like changed their entire business model in terms of whether it was starting with the WWE Network and then later Peacock, where you didn't have to pay for these individual events, and therefore these individual events didn't necessarily have to be super special because you're not charging like you would traditionally during a pay-per-view. Switching to this WWE Premium model where you are looking at trying to get people to pay $30 for these
yeah.
pay-per-views in certain cases is a huge difference from where they were and what they have trained their fan base to expect. And how does that translate is a major thing. And does the accessibility of the product change? Like it's beneficial to be on ESPN in some ways. And remember, we were told that some events would be simulcast on ESPN,
Mm.
which I haven't heard anything about soon. And I would imagine if an event such as the Royal Rumble was being simulcast on ESPN next month, we might have heard that by now, but we'll see. Um, but like
Isn't it? There's an interesting time for that one as well, isn't it? Because of the time difference.
mhm.
You'd want
Well,
that in
and
US prime time, really.
yeah, so it wouldn't be in US primetime, but like I mean they could dump it anywhere. They could dump it on ESPN too. ESPN has 1,000
Mm.
networks, so they could put it anywhere and it would do better ratings than almost anything that they would do. Like um if it's competing with whatever, depending on what it's competing with. But the chances are on a Saturday afternoon after the college football season, it's gonna be pretty minor stuff on ESPN. It's but the accessibility, like I think Brandon Thurston is a big believer in the pay-per-views being available on Peacock to something that people might already subscribe to for other reasons. And you'd be like, oh, I can watch the Royal Rumble on this streaming service that I'm already subscribed to. Or if I was like a Comcast cable subscriber, I just automatically have anyway. And that being a really accessible way for people to get more invested in the WWE product. I think there's a lot of logic to that belief in the sense of like, oh, I'll watch the Royal Rumble and oh, that was kind of fun and I didn't have to pay for it. And maybe I'll buy a ticket next time that they're in town or maybe I'll watch Raw this week or something like that. Does that change with now it going behind a more restricted paywall? Does that take away the benefits from being on ESPN and getting that extra advertising from ESPN shows? I have no idea. I'm of the belief that every person in America knows what WWE is, and they're choosing to not watch it for their own reasons. And it's not because they don't know what WWE is, which is something that some people have argued. It certainly was the case. Oh, they'll be on Fox, and everyone will know about WWE SmackDown. It's like everyone knows what WWE is. It's been around as a major institution for over 50 years. It's been a mainstream institution for well over 40 years now. Like we know, like people in America know what WWE is. Like they're not watching Monday Night Raw because they don't know what it is. And I think that's probably reflected in like, yeah, it's great to be in the Netflix carousel, but I don't think that's going to make somebody who's never watched wrestling before start watching wrestling.
There was an amazing comment back in January that it would be like taking Americana to the world, which I still have never gotten over. Because it's like Americana's not been, hugely part of world culture for the last 50 odd years. But yeah, no, I do think there is,
And
I
and
do
I,
agree.
around the world, there's I imagine right now, especially to the year 2025, the global audiences are just clamoring for Americana the American flag and how ever the opinion of America around the world has never been higher. So it's definitely something that's going to be very popular in other markets outside the
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I won't say anything else on that will get me in trouble. But I do agree with Brandon in point because it's something that, I keep talking about women's football, but that's something I'm hugely invested in. But that is something that is part of their strategy in terms of having, a free offering or availability offering. And that's even why, they get a lot less money to run matches on the BBC, but it's seen as an important way of growing the game. But yeah, does WB really need that? Is that something like they are not really a growing brand in terms of that aspect, in terms of acknowledgement or understanding or people investing into the game. Like it's not like investing into a game that's growing. Or we have some of Major League Baseball here. They're now running on the BBC in the UK on the iPlayer, and that is attracting new things. But that's because it's not a brand that everybody in the UK, so is into or associates with. So you have the opportunity to expand. I don't see that for WWE. This, in most countries around the world, this has been an established product for 20, 30 years at least. So I don't think you can look at it in that aspect and think that it will change anything. Again, they were smart to make sure that they were on all different services, that they had the linear option in the US, that they have the Netflix option, that they have other streamers. But ESPN's probably the one that feels like the most risk, because even though you have so much coverage on ESPN, like if you're not having that linear function, if they don't start showing these PLEs on there, I don't know how much more difference it would make. And it is something that is more narrow in its mindset in terms of who's going to be consuming that product, who's going to be kind of paying for that product, than something like a Peacock or a Netflix. So in a way, that their global thing with Netflix feels more valuable currently to me, and that's as a US outsider, than using this US property when it comes to visibility, at least.
I'm gonna switch to let's talk about. Do you want to talk about wrestling companies, or do you want
Talk
to talk
about
about,
whatever you want,
or you want to talk
whatever
about
you want.
retirement tours? Because we have
Oh
two
God.
topics on both.
Oh, you take your pick. I'm
All
not
right, we're
good at
gonna
this.
we're gonna do the retirement tours. We'll start with the
Oh,
Hiroshi Tana. Well, let's stay with WWE land. We'll start with John Cena's retirement tour. Um,
okay.
Definitely an evolving story over the year. We knew John Cena was going to
Yeah.
retire before this year, but we knew that this was going to be a year. And I had Joe Lanza on my podcast just about a year ago, where we talked about what's John Cena's final year going to be like reflections on his career and all that kind of stuff like that. Um, the plus side would be that John Cena has continued to be a very large business mover for WWE. I think you're definitely seeing it, especially in terms of his appearances on as a live show ticket draw, especially as this the last half of this year where we've done a lot of this is the last time Cena's appearing in Madison Square Garden. This is the last time John Cena's appearing in Boston. This is the last time John Cena's appearing on Raw. Like all this kind of stuff has been a really beneficial to WWE from a business perspective, as I think pretty much everyone anticipated. And uh, so that's good. Um, the bad side of it is that from an execution perspective, this has been seeming really, really dull. I can't say that I'm watching a ton of WWE product at the moment, but from what I've seen and what I've heard, they came up with this decision to. I guess my general takeaway about the John Cena retirement tour is that they wasted a bunch of time doing a heel turn that was maybe a good idea in theory, in the sense that there was a lot of novelty in John Cena being a heel. I think it quickly fell apart when people realized that John Cena is didn't have any interest in being a heel at all. So he was a super uninteresting personality, which is not what needed to happen. And I think the other part of his in this, and you can this plays into even since he's become a babyface again, is that people for a long time were annoyed that John Cena was a very stale character that won all of his matches and the Super Cena booking and all of that kind of stuff. But that was all thoughts in 2011. The issue is in 2025 on his retirement tour. I think fans in general want to see Super Cena. They want to see him hit the five moves of doom. They want him to say his same catchphrases. He hasn't been a part of WWE on a consistent basis in many years. This is the time for him to do all of that. And instead, they've gone with this crazy heel turn that didn't work, and they had to abandon it after a few months. And then also throwing him into these storylines that people don't really care about and feel kind of like this current Dominic storyline, like kind of like insulting to John Cena. That like in John Cena's last appearance on pay-per-view ever at Survivor Series, looked like a complete idiot and lost to Dominic Mysterio. Like, how is that his last bit? Like, there's just such an obvious mishandling of what I would consider to be, really one of your all-time legendary figures. Um, and that has been a defining aspect both. So there's the positive of the business aspects that John Cena has brought to this company, but also has, I think, exposed the creative issues this company has had in 2025. That is not something that just like me and you and like other weirdos are talking about. Like the WWE fans are starting to pick up on it a lot more.
And it always takes a few more months, doesn't it, before people start to actually point out the issues of it, before it actually seems to transcend to the wider fan base, or even a year, but especially these days now, where people seem to stay in the moment for longer than maybe they did in times past. But yeah, I think they should have done more business with Cena this year. I actually think they haven't done enough business, and it's been because of the booking. Because, yeah, as you laid out, they did a awful heel turn that you could clearly see he was not invested in, and then whatever that was at WrestleMania was, I think that it was damaging to the brand. I
Hmm.
think it was damaging to WrestleMania. I think it was hugely damaging to Cody Rhodes. So that's the big thing about this run is I think it's Rhodes in particular is taking enormous damage between that and the back face turn at SummerSlam, and then being the least most important thing with a Cena Brock Lesnar thing. Like all those decisions just seem so backward and so away from what they were doing a few years back, where they were elevating and kind of moving forward in a way that they hadn't been. Because this is the balance that you have when it comes to retirement runs, is in a way like you want, as you said, like people want that nostalgia hit. They want the greatest hits tour, right? Like the boy bands in the UK at the moment touring everywhere. They want to hear new music. They don't want to see anything different. They want the greatest hits. They might not have even liked it then. They might not have even gone out and bought a record then or hated it or, but they want it now.
Can I cut you off for a second? My
Sure.
Spotify Wrapped came out today, as it did for most people, and
Oh no, go on.
it gives you a listener age based on the music you listen to, like what they think
Right.
your age is based on your listenership. And my listener age was a spry 66 years old.
Mine was 47, so I'm not that far behind.
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, my friend got 28, and I was like, "How did you do that?" Like he's just like you got actually younger than you really were. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no, but that's it. That mine was based on listening to like 90s rock and dance playlists.
Mhm.
That's how that's it. So we all have that kind of edge of element of nostalgia that we play into, I think, these days, sometimes where we want to go back to, different things. But yeah, that's what they wanted. They wanted that greatest hits tour. They wanted to wear like the Super Cena shirts. And you saw it in like Crown Jewel where they had like the whole arena, it was like wearing the same shirt sort of thing. And like a playoff game, in NBA or the NHL or something, and they didn't get that. So then they were forced to boo him. Maybe it was fun for a couple of weeks, but that's not what you wanted. And especially like the last time you see him, when you're going to see something like that in a retirement, like you're looking for those last memories. That I was there the last time Cena
Mhm.
did this in my town and that. Not like I don't want to go out and boo him. I just like want to go and cheer and have fun and and they see it as they want to recognize him for his time with WWE. So yeah, they did this. I think they missed huge business on that. Like they did great business in terms of him, and I think you can already see like with him not around, that's going to be, especially a live event business, you're going to see the difference. But it's like I think they should have done so much more. I think they messed that up and they've damaged other people with it. And yeah, I don't think you get anything out of the Dominic Mysterio thing. You mentioned Tanahashi, so I'll do you a direct comparison. Is I look at like the Yota match that he had, with a baby face, he's chasing a title, and they do that finish and they make it something like emotional. It feels more like a passing the torch moment. But this just felt like why are you screwing Cena for? And like in a show where everyone's in Petco Park, they've come to see John Cena. They didn't give a damn about like anything else on the show to anywhere close to the level of John Cena. So why is that what you're delivering? Why is that the last thing that you're leaving your audience with? AEW did this right with Sting. He won the tag titles, you had tag title defenders, and then you have the big go out moment, and it's all like, the happiness and that sort of thing. Like, if you're going to do these retirement tours, that's how you do it. I get like there's the old school idea of we need to put people over on the way out, but there's ways to do that, it means, without actually disappointing your fan base. And I do think, and you saw what they did in Boston was far more successful than what they've done since. having him getting
That
completely
was the one
squashed.
time they did
Yeah,
what they like kind of like should have been doing this whole
yeah,
time.
like having him completely squashed for Brock Lesnar to do what? It's not like these even be talked about as the main matches at WrestleMania next year, is it? So why did you do it? Like, what did you gain out of it? And you're making these. That's what it feels like to me with the Cena tour this year. Is they've made a ton of decisions where they haven't gained anything out of it, and actually they've lost out of some of them.
Yeah, I mean the whole Lesnar squash, which I get, oh, let's recreate this thing from 10 years ago, and it's like if they should have like if they wanted to have like Walter or like Obafemi come up or Braun Breaker come up and
Mm.
squash John Cena, then you're at least doing something, right? You're
Yeah,
putting
you're elevating somebody at
instead it's
least.
like Brock Lesnar, who the fan base already is pretty much at maximum investment in terms of like this guy we take seriously as a challenger to anybody. Um, just he gets a rub from Cena. It just I think like if your favorite restaurant was closing down and you went there for one final time, and they're like, okay, we got a new menu with all of our new stuff. Like you'd be like, what the hell is this? This is the last time I'm ever gonna go to this restaurant. I want to get my simple favorites. Like, and that's basically what this John Cena retirement tour has been. And I
Mm.
think you make a really good point in terms of like the heel turn, damage to Cody, like like is like not only is this like oh they didn't totally capitalize on what they could do with Cena, but also it's just kind of like really like undermine some other people on the roster. They're doing that, and they're his last match is going to be like this kind of like heatless tournament where these mid-card wrestlers fight over the right to face Cena for the last time, and like all the actual big stars like don't give a shit about it, and uh it's gonna be him probably versus Walter, like which is fine, like Walter's a guy you can put over, I guess, like um but it
Yeah,
just
they're going to do that as very much like the evil foreigner, aren't they, in Washington, D.C.? It's like a throwback to the 90s, it feels like.
my like I probably shouldn't say this. But as someone whose interest in WWE pretty much is just from like I want them to be like as bad and as like chaotic and as Schadenfreude as possible, I like think it'll be hilarious if like the Cena's final show is like totally overshadowed by like Trump being there and like WWE showing Trump or something like that, which is allegedly something that may happen.
It would
Um,
be. If he goes there, that's going to be the story.
yes, and
Yeah.
I think that would be hilarious. I will WWE fans being like, oh, why would they do this? Why would they do this to us? Like that is, I'm gonna be like walking next day with an extra spring in my step because I think that will just be so funny. In situations like this, you kind of have to laugh, but like, I didn't even think about like oh, he's gonna fight, evil foreigner. Gunther. Gunther's you can't be Walter. You've got to be Gunther. Um, so that's the Cena retirement tour. Uh, Cena is not the only legendary career babyface retiring. We've also got Hiroshi Tanahashi in a very different type of retirement tour. Um, very different type of who is going to be his last opponent kind of story in regards to that.
Yeah.
Trish, you wouldn't happen to know anything about how Hiroshi Tanahashi's final opponent came about. Is that something that you
Mm,
have discussed at all previously?
no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I figured when I put this on the sheet, I'm like, Trish probably has nothing to say about Hiroshi Tanahashi's retirement tour, so I'll just mention it and then we'll gloss over it.
Oh,
But
oh,
what I'll say briefly is, it's a different market. The Japanese market compared to um, the WWE market, the United States market, and I think like it was kind of hard to take Tanahashi's retirement tour. I guess like that seriously up until like this last quarter of the year when they've started being like this is Tanahashi's last time in these cities because it's like he's retiring, but it's like, are you really going to be like, oh, this is if you're at like a March Korakuen Hall show, you're not like, oh, this is the last time I'll ever see Hiroshi Tanahashi at Korakuen Hall. It's like, oh, actually, he's going to be back here 15 more times. But now we're really seeing I think the wheels turning, it becoming like a big deal. And then we have, of course, his final match, which is going to be against Kazuchika Okada at the Tokyo Dome in 2026. But um, I would say like they've done a better job of making his last match interesting, I think, than WWE has in regards to Cena. Um, I think people's, views may vary regarding that. So
I've had like real mixed views on his last year in general. So I don't think that they kind of did enough to promote certain things through the year. So for example, like his 100th G1 win was they did not make that as big as they should have. However, this last cycle, I think they have done a good job of. And, you can see the promotion that they're doing for Wrestle Kingdom goes way beyond kind of traditional media as well. You're finding him popping up on things on TikTok, on Instagram, on places that you wouldn't expect to see him. So they've really kind of made this feel much bigger and much more organized in doing that than they were for anything last year. The big thing for me is that you've actually ticked on something that people who live in Japan will tell you is that you were never going to get, like him challenging Gabe Kidd in the Adachi Budokan was never going to get, sell out house because Tanahashi's in it in his last year. Like the way that market works was it was going to be the last time in this city. You're going to save up to go to that last match at the Tokyo Dome. You're not going to go see him at the Budokan 2 months before and that sort of thing. So that is very much culturally how they work. And we started to see that with Destruction in Kobe in September, which was one of the only shows for the autumn that was actually up on the previous year. And it was like fully marketed about this is the last time Tanahashi is in Kobe. So, and then we're seeing it fully on this World Tag League kind of final road tour. So yeah, it's a bit of kind of half and half glass, half full, half empty, but ending like really strongly. And he's worked really hard this year. He's had more singles matches than any year since 2006, which is
Mhm.
nuts when you think about the state of his body and the amount of times that I've heard like they feel like they need to shut this guy down. Like, how is he going to get through to G1? Like, what's going on? I mean, that Gabe Kidd match was like a thing for that because he was not in a good way. And if you watch that match, you'll see how much Gabe kind of has to stall for him. But yeah, he's managed to get through it. And it truly feels like a massive, massive show at the Tokyo Dome next year in a way that I don't think Wrestle Kingdoms have for quite some time. And it's an important show as well. And I think what I like about his last bit as well is like the company is not all about Tanahashi. Maybe it's most of what we're talking about at the moment because obviously that decision and everything. And I may have stirred the pot of that with with the article as well. But it's like there is setup going forward. The thing that he did with Yorusuji and Gifu just felt like so powerful and such a demonstration of like the company needs to transition and this is how we move forward. So as much as that night's a celebration of Tanahashi, it's also about these things that can move us forward, and we'll see what happens with Aaron Wolf, which obviously Tanahashi is hugely invested in. But yeah, I think they definitely got the end right, and I think that is going to feel so much more consequential as a show and as a moment than Cena's retirement is by a long, long way, and especially because it's so visible. Cena's retirement is now hidden away on Peacock and that sort of thing, rather than being on NBC, and now we've got prime time television for the first time in decades in Japan for a Wrestle Kingdom. Combined with Tanahashi retirement, combined with Aaron Wolf. So yeah, it's a big. It feels like it's growing to the moment in the way that the Cena thing just feels like it's kind of petering out. I guess that's the difference between the two for me in terms of these tours. But I have to question myself though because I thought I'm not really one for nostalgia. It has been said. Um, but as we get closer and you see that these last times in different cities and you see the way he addresses the crowd, I do kind of get a little bit emotional about it and just think about, you know, the way that I view Tanahashi and like the times that you've watched Tanahashi in the past. So I almost question myself in terms of how I talk about nostalgia. It's like this is the first time I've probably been wrapped up in something like that. Um, Ever maybe I don't know, but that's how it feels to me. But that just tells you how good he is as a baby face as well, and how good he is at connecting with people, and in a more authentic way than maybe a John Cena, I would say.
Yeah, I don't get like nostalgic at all about this stuff. Like
Mm.
I don't care. Like Cena's my first favorite wrestler. Cena or
Yeah,
The Undertaker, like my first favorite wrestler. Like 10-year-old Jesse when I was 10 in 2005 when he won the world title for the first time. Like he's from the same part of the country as I am. Uh
yeah,
like uh not not really a Boston guy as Cena is. I think that's he's the kind of guy that will wear a Red Sox hat when he's in Boston to show that he's a Boston guy, but he's not really a Boston guy. Um, I don't make the rules on this, and I'm just saying how it is. But like I don't like Cena's retirement. Like I don't know. Cena's gonna retire. Okay, he hasn't been like a consistent wrestler in years, so I don't really care. Like when Undertaker retired, okay, like who cares? Um, Tanahashi, like I love Tanahashi. He's retiring like Okay,
Fair? Yeah.
I think the ceremony, like his actual retirement and the ceremony and everything will be very cool. Just like it was for Sting. Like I didn't
Mm,
necessarily have like a ton of nostalgia for Sting. I'm really too young to have like Sting nostalgia. But
same.
obviously his retirement was incredibly well done, and seeing all the fans that did love him, seeing that was very cool. And I think that uh Tanahashi should be excellent as well. I did
I just.
ironic just because it was done so well. Nagata's final G1 match,
Mm,
if you remember that against
hmm.
Fale, and they had everyone like holding up the signs, and they had like I think Shinpei Nogami was like crying on commentary. Like that's like that hits me. That in spite I don't really have Yuji Nagata's like um nostalgia. He was already an old wrestler by the time I started watching him. So but Tanahashi, I think he did not embarrass himself this year, which is one of the things I was worried about. I was like, man, how is he going to
Mm.
do a G1? Like him and Sting had the same thing in common where anytime they went to the top rope to do something, which was more common for Tanahashi than it was for Sting, where you're like, oh my God, what if this guy just like lands and turns into dust? Like that's like this anxiety you have about these Tanahashi moments, and the fact that he got through the G1 and the fact that he's done so many singles matches and that he has had some exciting like legitimately good wrestling matches. He
Yeah.
doesn't have any, five-star classics that are going to rival his best matches from his career, but he has been very good this year, and you said he's worked extremely hard, which I can't obviously agree with. Um he um so I think he's done really well, and it is kind of sad because the one time I saw him live, which was a number of years ago, like probably right before the pandemic, they had a New Japan show here in Lowell, Massachusetts, and he gave kind of the post-show promo, and he said he's like, "I'm never gonna stop. I'm never gonna retire." And like when you see Tanahashi, like, yeah, of course he's never gonna retire. This guy clearly is obsessed with pro wrestling, and history tells us that these guys never ever retire. And if they do, it's because they have absolutely nothing left in the tank and they are completely embarrassing themselves. And the fact, so I'm kind of surprised he actually is retiring. He's retiring like young for a wrestler of his stature. Like usually these wrestlers keep going like well into their 50s and even into their 60s. Muto is a great example. Like you look at who are Tanahashi's influences, Keiji Muto and Tatsunumi Fujinami. Those guys wrestled forever. Fujinami is still wrestling.
Yeah, I saw
Um,
him wrestle in March last year,
yeah.
actually, in the Korakuen,
So
yeah.
the fact that he's retiring and the fact that he is going out, obviously like we can say his body is a wreck, but he's still able to have good matches, um, is like really impressive and also kind of surprising.
I think there's an element to some wrestlers now, of that pride in terms of what you can deliver is more important to them maybe it was in the past. And I think he may be someone on that level. And I guess it's different as well because he is transitioning into being the
Yes, he
president
has
of
a
New
big
Japan.
job. He has a big job where he's also going to probably be pretty like reasonably well compensated for. Um,
Yeah.
which a
So
lot of the reason these
that's
guys keep
huge.
going, a lot of the reason these guys keep going is money related too.
And especially in Japan, it's
Hmm.
very difficult to get into another industry at a later age as well. So I can see that's a huge, huge part of it. And, that job has become bigger as this year's progressed too. So it's definitely that sort of thing. And I don't believe he will wrestle again. I think he's one of those that, like, I don't think he will. I think he'll keep to this is what I said and this is what I'll do. But yeah, I think the other big thing about that is, compared to the Cena thing, is it hasn't really taken over New Japan in that way. So it's not going to be like, well, his story ends. So what have we got next? I think they have done a better job and a better job at the end of this year than many times during it, to be honest, of setting up pathways going forward. And he'll still be a figurehead for them. It's not like he's going there completely. He can still be a figurehead for that company, but it is maybe time. And I was thinking about this when talking to John Pollock and Brandon Thurston today. Is that I think it is time for them to kind of let go of that era and start again because it's almost like they've had like they can't let go, like they have to hold on to everything. And we've seen, like, I get it from a business sense because they are a live event business, but we saw how kind of overworked and how much they went with Tetsuya Naito last year as his body disintegrated. And if you don't start giving the opportunities to some of the younger guys, like that, it's just like holding on. I guess it's similar with Cena as well, because they've kind of plugged their holes, WWE, this year, with Cena kind of balancing their books essentially. He's been the one kind of generating most of the bigger numbers, but then you get that bigger decline when they step away. So the fact that Tanahashi's been doing kind of all these matches on these shows, but they've not been the top of the card. He's not wandering around with titles and the big, he's not IWGP champion for 6 months. And God, could you imagine? I quite like a little Tanahashi heel turn in some ways, but he played a little bit of heel with ELP in the Ryogoku match, and I quite enjoyed that. But it was like, yeah, he's not done that. So it's been something that has been more on the download, and I could argue that you should have done more of it with the G1. But I think like they've peaked it perfectly. And as much as it is the biggest match for the Tokyo Dome, it doesn't mean that people aren't excited for the world title match or don't want to see the debut of Elm Wolf, especially domestically. So I do think they're doing a better job of that it doesn't feel like everything ends here and we don't need to watch New Japan anymore, sort of thing. And I do think that there may be an element of that when it comes to the Cena retirement, especially because if they're going to run kind of a lot of rematches and things that people have already seen, that's the big danger, isn't it? I think that's a huge cultural thing now as well, is that like if people have seen it, they've seen it and they've done it and they want to move on. You have to find ways to keep them kind of entertained and enthralled. So in some ways that kind of power vacuum or that like difference in the top end of New Japan could be an attraction. It could also be fun. It could also get really messed up. This can go either way, but there is an intrigue in there not being a Tanahashi at the top, like a Okada at the top and a Naito at the top, or even an Omega at the top for the first time in like a decade.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a separate discussion about like if you were to go into 2025 and say, all right, your IWGP World Champions are going to be Naito, Zack Sabre Jr., Haruki Goto, and then Takeshita. Zack had twice, but like it's like it's not exactly. It's like, oh wow, like I guess Takeshita is obviously a new face to be in there, but it's like, oh, so it's like really clinging on to that generation of wrestlers. Is interesting. I'm gonna switch gears. Another major story. In April, WWE purchases AAA. This is the biggest wrestling company be purchased by another wrestling company since WCW was purchased. Um, Felt like really big news at the time. We are now, 8 months removed from that. It seems like WWE's in TKO's like impact in Mexico seems to be a little bit more gradual or slower paced than I originally thought. I thought we'd immediately see like the entire Mexican wrestling industry get upended. It doesn't seem like any of that has happened yet, but obviously something worth monitoring into 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, and we'd spoken about that, last time I was on your show, we were talking about the kind of global impact of this kind of AEW war. And it was not long after, that deal had been signed. And I remember it's such a shock because Conan's a bit like Seth Rollins with injuries, isn't he? It's like the boy that cried wolf. Like he's like, you're gonna sign a deal, we're gonna get sold, or this, and you kind of just went, yeah, whatever. And then like this came out WrestleMania weekend, and it was like, oh my God, actually, like they have sold. And I guess this was always their aim because they were cuddling up to WWE from the time they did the kind of thing with FTR and Dragon Lee and stuff. But it's an interesting one because they've not had, you're right, they've not had a huge impact on that market yet. So they've not restricted too many of their wrestlers from being able to work other shows. There's incidents and there's little things, but nowhere near as much as we thought. They may just pull everybody off. They seem to be focused on just using their talent and the independent talent available to them. They've not been able to go after CMLL wrestlers, or they've not chosen to at the current time. Whether that's because some of them are dual contracted, and we know Hechicero is dual contracted, but I would put very good money on Mascara Dorada being dual contracted, is a question. But also, they haven't really made huge kind of progress or difference in terms of building that product. So live-wise, they're doing very well. let me be clear that their big shows this year since that purchase have done very well. Dominic Mysterio particularly is very, very popular there. And it's not affected CML. CML have, I think that kind of competition aspect has helped to keep their attendance strong during those same days as well. But yeah, they have that part of their business. How much that actually means monetarily, I don't think it makes a huge difference from what they were doing previously, but that is doing okay. The TV deal, so they've signed a new TV deal, but it's still not anywhere close to the level of what CMLL's deal is in Mexico, and there is no US deal. And what I found really interesting, so you had the big kind of When Worlds Collide show that did very well on YouTube. They could tout their numbers in a similar way to what TNA done a part of building their current deal. And then they had the show in Las Vegas that didn't do anywhere close to that and kind of didn't have the kind of the press or the push. And we're now at a stage where you have this purchase, and whether it's around influence or what, we're not seeing the kind of any other benefit. So I did think that maybe there'd be more push for a AAA deal in the US, and I don't feel like we've seen that, and we don't even hear talk of that at current. So that's been quite interesting. So now it feels, in a way, it's hard because you're seeing a little bit of friction around how the things are changing, and the production's different, and it's very kind of WWE clean, which actually makes AAA for someone like me incredibly boring now. And the wrestling is like, it's like watching main roster WWE in terms of we can't do this, we can't do that. Like, you've taken some of the kind of originality and the kind of the chaos that actually was part attraction to AAA away, but I don't see anything else that's really changed, and I am sort of surprised by that. I mean, it still gives them an outlet. They still have this huge presence, number 2 company in Mexico in terms of their global kind of influence, but we've not seen it kind of have I guess it's not had like the speed or consequence that we maybe expected to see, or similar to what we saw with what they did with like NXT UK, for example.
Yeah, and did you talk about the Worlds Collide shows? Do they have another one scheduled? Like,
yes.
so they do have another one.
Oh no, I
Like,
don't.
because they did those shows and I haven't heard any of them since. It seems like
I don't
I'm
think
getting the impression that WWE has lost, at least like maybe Paul Levesque, like has kind of like lost interest in like integrating CMLL into WWE at all, or I'm sorry, AAA into WWE at all. I mean, we see
No, they don't. Oh, I will correct that. They don't have anything currently planned.
that's what I
And
thought.
yeah.
And like there was the initial push where it's like, all right, they have Vikingo, who they thought they would market to the American audiences, and I guess Mr. Iguana got on as like a perfect kind of like lower card WWE gimmick. But and you mentioned like Dominic Mysterio and some other talent, going down to AAA and working, but you really don't see this big crossover between the brands at all. It seems like they've kind of lost interest in that.
Mm.
Um, I do think it's just bizarre. I saw this poster, and it might not have been an official WWE poster. It might have been something else, but it almost doesn't matter. But it was like, talking about AAA, and then in the top right corner it had Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and The Undertaker. And it's like these are the people that are responsible for one of the major lucha promotions in the world. Is The Undertaker is now heavily involved, according to reports.
Mm.
And it's just such a bizarre world to live in. It's not a good one. Um, but I do wonder, like what is this going to look like in 2026? It's starting. I'm starting to get the feeling that this is going. Like we kind of thought this was go one or two ways. The first way was like they're going to upend wrestling in Mexico. They're going to leverage their money to really change the wrestling business in Mexico and go after CMLL hard and try to sign all CMLL's talent and compete with CMLL and do all this kind of stuff. Or they're gonna like lose interest and it's gonna be like kind of not as significant as we thought. And as we sit here on December 2025, 8 months removed, I'm starting to think that we're looking at scenario B, that WWE is starting to lose some interest in AAA, but maybe that changes in the coming years.
Yeah, I think they can have that presence there, and then if they want to escalate it. But I do think that you have quite a good point about how much faith they have, considering like the Grande Americano character, they were happy to just kind of squash that on NXT, uh, which was, that's not something you do if you're kind of really pushing a brand. And although they're using kind of Mr. Iguana um, predominantly, as the one that they are bringing up. It's not. I did expect to see more. I did expect them to push it more, especially after the first One Worlds Collide show was, got kind of rave reviews and that sort of thing. Um, but I guess my thing is, what is AAA? Like, how are you presenting that? What makes it any different? You know, it's the same as a TNA thing, isn't it, in a way? Like, what is this brand? Because they're not wrestling a lucha style. They are, and especially now they're wrestling a WWE style. So,
And it's not grimy and like disgusting the way that AAA was pre WWE merger,
no,
where it was this like bottom of the barrel scum company doing crazy things for heat angles and in some ways like a largely outdated wrestling company, but at least gave it its own character.
yeah. So, what is it that you could market this as that is different from your current product? I guess
It's
is more what I'm thinking.
WWE endorsed Lucha Libre, and it's legit. According to Rey Mysterio, legitimizes Lucha Libre finally. And a great example of people will say
Oh,
anything for money is Rey Mysterio saying that WWE has finally legitimized Lucha Libre by purchasing AAA. More wrestling company news. Relatively recently, Deadlock Pro Wrestling announced that they are going on indefinite hiatus starting in 2026. I think they have one to be announced show in Japan that they're doing in 2026. But I think I wanted to point out just for the US indie scene, Deadlock Pro is one of the few companies that really got a level of like national attention. And I think it speaks to the current indie scene, which is really rough in the US in terms of reliable promotions that are producing content that fans want to see. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think I don't want to overstate like, oh, the US indies is in a completely dire situation because I don't think that's true. I find that a lot of indies have good local followings, but the idea of like the super indie that people from around the country, around the world are going to be tuning into is greatly at risk, at least in the United States. It might be a little bit different in the UK, because UK does still have Rev Pro, which is at least a company that, like, as an American, I'm like, oh, a big Rev Pro show, I want to watch that. I know that people have mixed feelings about Rev Pro now, but DPW like was one of those, and especially as a relatively new company, um, and it's disappointing. But I also think it speaks to it's tough to make money as an independent wrestling promoter. It's tough to make money as a promoter that's going to be flying in talent, um, and even in areas that have a good amount of wrestling talent. I was talking to um, Chris, who we both mutually know. He lives in Los Angeles. When I was in LA, and I met him for dinner, and he was saying, in LA, especially, with PWG kind of no longer around, we have a lot of wrestling schools, and we have like wrestlers, indie wrestlers in the Southern California area, but you lack that promoter that can kind of put together a reliable product that's consistent. And that's really, I think, in the United States, the main issue is that there's just very, very few people out there that are willing to take the risk and the challenge of running an independent wrestling promotion and flying in talents and you know putting on shows that's going to get attention not just locally but around the world because we brought in this indie wrestler from Japan to come in and headline one of our shows, or we're bringing in maybe an AEW talent's going to come in and work this show, or just other things that would get you attention outside your local market. Because I went to a local indie here that probably nobody outside of New England has heard of, called Chaotic Wrestling, and like there was probably like 200 to 250 fans there, and they had the fans that were there seemed to know the wrestlers, and a lot of them were like wrestling school era kind of in their career. But it was like I was like, this is not like a show with 50 people. This is a lively event, and there's a lot of local indies that are like that. But the idea of this big indie company is now like this. I mean, there's Defy in Seattle. There's like Pro Wrestling Revolver maybe, or there's West Coast Pro, but you're starting to get to it. And then there's this whole like WWE NXT influence that has taken place on these indie wrestling shows where they're all just trying to do WWE stuff as opposed to like US 2010 US indie stuff. That's also a factor. But I think that's an important story to keep to just discuss in 2025.
Oh, I agree. What I would say is I do think that this stuff kind of comes in cycles, and maybe it's more difficult now because of the presence of a second major American company and TNA potentially becoming more. But I don't think that this is something that hasn't happened before in terms of the US indies and the UK indies. I recall back to kind of the mid 2000s into the early 2010s, and we had a very similar thing here, where it felt like there wasn't any talent, where it felt like there was no value in bringing over so much kind of talent from other places because people had seen that. It's much more difficult to bring somebody, especially an import, back the second time or the third time.
Hmm.
And it took basically a whole new crop of talent to come through. And then you're right, the promoters that were willing to kind of do things differently or try things different or kind of use that and build their promotions around that sort of talent, like the likes of what PCW and Southside and Rev Pro were doing at that time. Rev Pro were more of it in like bringing import, but they were bringing imports in that hadn't been across. We were bringing New Japan wrestlers that had never been to the UK before, and you kind of need that pool to be reset in order to build back up again. But it is a shame because again, it's like I kind of have this theme today of this cultural thing, but we had this huge expansion where you didn't need to watch WWE for so many years if you didn't want to. And you didn't have a second big company or anything like that, but you didn't need to because you could watch these super indies, these other companies. If you felt like you weren't into, say, even like the AEW product, you could watch PWG if you were more into that sort of thing. You could watch this, you could watch that. And that's more healthy, I think, in terms of an industry rather than just having kind of this is our model of how wrestling is. And that's how people learn, they develop. And that's the other thing for me as well as all the points that you've raised, is that it's the development of talent that worries me the most because people don't get that experience of spending a few years learning their trade in these sort of places. Things like this where you have some sort of live streaming element helps them to learn the promo element or helps them to learn how to wrestle in that kind of environment before they hit the kind of the TV properties. And now it's like we have this race of signing people earlier and earlier and earlier, and then putting them straight into these kind of very dry development systems, or taking them straight to TV and expecting them to develop on TV, which is incredibly difficult. And it does make me worry about that kind of development and what talent will be able to succeed in future with the way that things are without being able to get that kind of experience and working that kind of medium between the kind of independent level of your 200 300 people shows and straight to TV in front of 5 6 7,000 and however hundreds of thousands worldwide or millions worldwide on these shows. It's a different environment to learn in, and it also means that you're going to end up with kind of less variation in terms of the talent coming through in terms of how they learn and the styles and the things that they incorporate into their kind of resume and how they present themselves effectively. So yeah, and that's the thing with the AAA thing. It's another place where things are becoming standardized to that kind of WWE style, and I hate that. I legitimately hate that because when you look at, even if you were to look at like AEW now, you look at the mix of styles. People like Pac and the Young Bucks and Ricochet, who heavily like Dragon Gate influenced. Is it an option for people to do Dragon Gate tours anymore? If you don't get noticed in the US independents, like how are you able to do that? That sort of thing. It's like, and then you have like the Lucha influence, and you have this influence, and that's what I feel like we won't have the opportunity to do when you lose these kind of promotions that are in the middle, rather than what we had was it felt like a more sustainable ecosystem for development by having the kind of the middle sections. And there is something to having those shows as well in terms of being able to take people to shows who maybe aren't really into like the way TV's produced or anything like that, and it's like a more fun live experience, but it feels like you're part of something. And I think that's what, even though I'm not a huge Progress fan or never have been, that's what they were very good
Wow,
at.
not a fan of Progress, just in general, no progress.
I went to like one of their anniversary
I know,
shows
I'm
and I
making a
thought,
joke,
yeah,
but
I know, but I thought it was like the weirdest cult thing ever. I'm sorry, but
I went to a Progress show and I was not happy with it.
no,
I thought the wrestling was really good because
yeah,
it was peak Progress and they had a lot of really good names there. I thought it was very weird that like Smallman just like did like 20 minutes of stand-up comedy in the ring
yeah,
beforehand, and I was
yeah.
like,
That's the cult
Yeah.
element, right? He was
Yeah.
like, I have to be like the same. I found that so strange. But what they were good at, without me slating him to high hell, is they made people feel like a part of something. And ICW did the same, when they were coming up in Glasgow and that sort of thing. And I think you've seen some of the American promotions like in that medium range be able to capture that. GCW did for a bit, let's be honest, before that Hammerstein show. So if you're able to do that, you're more likely to succeed because people have that loyalty, they build that loyalty with you and they feel part of something. It's really important in able to transition from that kind of very small to that medium size, but there's a ceiling on it, and that's where it becomes difficult. And then you're right, especially in the current climate, bringing over imports particularly is becoming increasingly difficult for independent promotions as well. And then the cost of everything like that, travel's increasing, that sort of thing. So you've got all these kind of financial pressures, and you don't want to charge more because you know that cost of living is going up everywhere around the world. Inflation is going up around. So there's more and more challenges than maybe there ever been. And obviously, like losing something potentially like Triller, which doesn't feel like it's off the table at all, does it? When so many companies have kind of put all their faith into that as a medium to kind of get their content across. So then you're looking at, do you then go back to something like IWTV, or do you need to invest in your own kind of platform like a Rev Pro on Demand or what like DPW did? And then there's risks in that too. So there's so many, it feels like there's more considerations to doing that than there was, even like 10, 15 years ago. And that's just made everything more difficult.
All right. Where do I want to go next here? We'll start. We'll do this and then we'll finish with my three media related topics real quick. Um,
Cool.
like just general, like what do you think AEW, the biggest story in AEW in 2025 is?
Oh God. Um,
Because I was thinking about
that's
AEW topic and I was like, it's not like it's kind of like it's hard to pinpoint like one major thing in AEW. I guess the the most relevant thing long term is probably like the what we already discussed, like the HBO Max and the
sure,
simulcast and the pay-per-views being available there at a discounted rate are probably the biggest deal, which we've already kind of covered, so we don't necessarily need to spend a
sure.
ton of
Yeah,
time on that. But
no,
that's
pay-per-views on Max is probably long term going to be the biggest thing, I think. Yeah.
yeah. So my wrestling media stories. We'll start with the first one. Um, something that maybe some people forgot. Trish, do you remember when The Rock ruined WrestleMania?
Oh my God. Right. So I don't do victory laps very often, right? I normally leave them to Sarah. It's very un-British of me. But if you watched what was happening last year and you saw, right, especially with the documentary on WrestleMania and how long that took to come out and how it kind
Hmm.
of glazed up the rock, like you knew that this was coming. You knew that something stupid was going to happen. And it was only a matter of time. And this one was spectacular, to be honest. Like the to and froing that week after was a sight to behold.
Yeah.
Um,
So like, but if people remember, like, so the WrestleMania, the second night of WrestleMania ends where this John Cena, Cody Rhodes match happens, and um, it was like I guess so. This is one of the issues that I have where like I don't really consume the WWE product anymore, and I'm very more far removed than I ever have been before from like understanding what like the typical WWE fan expects and wants. But clearly, the WWE fan base thought that The Rock was going to be involved in the
well,
main
they,
event
they
of
had
WrestleMania.
they had shirts in their merchandise store
Yeah.
in that week, and that sort of stuff gets out. Like I've been to
Mhm.
Mania in the past, and it's like
But so then The
throw it away.
Rock doesn't come out WrestleMania. WrestleMania goes off the air, and everyone's like, "What the fuck was that?" And I can't remember who the rapper was.
Travis
Who?
Scott,
Travis
that's his name.
Scott. Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say the guy, the Fortnite guy. Travis
I've only
Scott.
seen him off that doc on Netflix for
Yeah,
that festival. So yeah,
Travis Scott got involved, and it was dumb, bad WWE creative, and it was in the aftermath, it was a coordinated campaign to smear The Rock as, oh, it's The Rock's fault that um, WrestleMania, the end of WrestleMania looked the way it did because The Rock wasn't around, and he inserts himself into this feud and then doesn't come to WrestleMania. And was this a power play by The Rock? And I think that the story is like The Rock versus Triple H Cold War.
hmm
Um, and just kind of in general. Now we haven't heard that much about it subsequent to like kind of WrestleMania week. Um, Dwayne's been off doing his own thing. It seems like Levesque has control over the creative side of the company to a degree, to at least to the degree that he's always had it. Um, so it'll be
But
interesting that
he's still very interested in putting himself front and center, like I'm
yes.
indisposable, though, isn't he?
Yes, Levesque is in the part of the and maybe part of this is The Rock's presence. Part of it is just his own ego.
Hmm.
Is that he wants to be Vince. He wants to be seen as indispensable to the company. Um, and he wants to, he loves himself. We all know he loves himself, and so he's going to insert himself into major things and put himself on posters and have a documentary following him around, talking about what all the things that he's doing and that he's an
That Boston Raw where he brought himself out before Cena was the ultimate. Like I couldn't actually
Hey,
believe that.
John Cena's not the only guy from New England that works in the company, okay? Paul Levesque, Paul Levesque is a New England legend, and he should be out there as well. Um, I mean, it's all funny. I'm again, like I'm rooting for this kind of stuff, but
Hmm.
like anyone that lived through like the reign of terror and like the Triple H era and
Yes.
understands who this guy like is and like the kind of about face that his image took largely at because of how fed up people were with Vince, that like Triple H was like this super like guy that loved the pro wrestling fans and was going to give the fans what they actually want and wasn't like a extremely vain, vindictive person obsessed with himself is I mean a fall from grace among the WWE fan base would be is very entertaining to me. And I thought the whole and clearly The Rock is used as a scapegoat, just like Vince was used as a scapegoat. Remember, we had the whole era where Vince was back after Levesque had kind of wrested control the first time, and
Hmm.
then there was this whole thing where like anything bad was blamed on Vince Creative, and anything good was clearly Paul Levesque, and people believing what they wanted to believe. And how much of that is Levesque, pulling the strings with the media behind the scenes, and how much of it is just people wanting to believe in something like Paul Levesque being the guy who's going to save WWE. Um, but obviously. Um, I mean, it's very funny that The Rock, who was not treated kindly by Paul Levesque at the very early stages of his career, is just back to fuck with Paul Levesque. I mean, this is like I don't know, like a movie where a bully gets what he deserves. Like it's really incredible in a lot of ways if you've been following it for and you're aware of their entire history.
See, the thing with The Rock is you may have lost that kind of battle this year, but I would just step back, let him. He's now, Levesque now got to do it without Cena. You've not got that thing to hang on to. And how long is it until he needs The Rock? So, and Rock has still all the cards. He's the one that's on the TKO board. He's the one that has the actual power rather than being just a guy in a job. So I would, yeah, if I was him, I'd just watch in the first few months. How long is it before they call on him like they did for Elimination Chamber? How long to TKO go to his door? And you go from there. But yeah, I think Triple H has that thing, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And for him, I think he might end up again on the losing end of that, just like he did with the AEW NXT stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if the Rock can take his victory lap because like the funny thing is, if you look back on like the Cena heel turn, and it's like, oh, if that was The Rock's idea, which is what it seemingly was blamed on, it's like the actual heel turn itself, that whole angle was really well received by everyone, and especially WWE fans. The problem was the follow-up was terrible, and there's been no storyline like real consistency to it afterwards. So if you were to go back in time and kind of reevaluate everything, you'd be like, well, when The Rock was around, it was good, but then when Paul Levesque had to step in and do anything with it, he couldn't do anything. And I'm really like pessimistic about his ability as a creative head anyway. It'll be interesting to see. My 2026 like bold prediction is that we will see some level of formal announcements that
Hmm.
somebody is like helping Paul Levesque in his creative role. Like WWE or TKO will come out and say, we are naming somebody, it could be like Paul Heyman as, a senior vice president of content creation, or it's just some public statement that Paul Levesque is no longer the sole person in charge of the creative process. Similar
Oh,
to the way that we saw them do that with Vince, like when they brought in Bischoff and Heyman, like, oh, these guys are going to take some off of Vince's plate as kind of a ploy to be like, yeah, the creative is going to change this company. I think that they are going to business is going to decline. There's going to be fan frustration for Paul Levesque. I don't think he's going to be fired. I don't think he's going to lose his job, but I do think we're going to get some level of um, like announcement, formal acknowledgement that someone new is going to come in with ideas and is going to be working with Paul Levesque.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up because I thought that that's the one that they could just run like a carbon copy of. Um, so I would half expect them to do that. I did think, did you see any clips of the end of Survivor Series?
No.
No, okay. What I did see was the complete non-reaction to the face-off with Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns, and I wonder how that develops, because at the end of the
Hmm.
day, one of the biggest things they're going to be judged on is WrestleMania, and that goes from not just the fans, but also their kind of partners.
Yep.
Because as you mentioned earlier, ESPN are saying, these are the small events, but this is their flagship event, right? So that one has to deliver for Levesque. And I do think that that's going to be a real interesting thing when they can't call on a John Cena for that sort of interest levels. And who is the only other guy that has that sort of, if you are getting yourself in and you're not getting that kind of momentum, well, it's The Rock. So that will put him in a very interesting position. The guess, yeah, it depends who that other name would be interesting as well. Because, Paul Heyman is somebody who always has political ambition, right? And would have no issue,
Heyman is
having
the
additional
perfect
power.
guy. Heyman's the perfect guy for this role, just like he was when they did it with Vince, even though it didn't last very long. But Heyman is someone that the WWE fan base believes in as a genius and will whatever he's doing will be correct.
Hmm.
Like that's what that fan base. So he's a perfect person to be like, you know what? Even though Paul Heyman is probably really heavily involved in the creative process right now, like if we say like, oh, Paul Heyman, he's going to be, we'll give him a new title or whatever, and announce that he's going to be more involved. That will get people more excited about the product, which will work for a period of time, whether or not it lasts. But I think there'll be enough heat on Levesque in the company where whether business is declining, fan reaction is poor, um, they'll look at that. I mean, the company itself is very interesting in the sense of like you look at who are the top stars in the company over the last, 6 months, like who are the people that are carrying the company and look at the age and the
Hmm.
um age of these guys. I mean, it's Cena who's not going to be around. It's Brock Lesnar who's probably not going to work a full schedule, and is also like 50. It's Roman who's not going to work a full schedule. It's Punk who's in his late 40s now, I think.
Yep.
It's Cody who's now over 40. Um, it's Seth who's now over 40 or close to it, who's out injured. Like their top talent is really old and it's relying on a lot of older talent. It's not going to be around that much. And the company, I think, has done a poor job this past year of even like when they elevate guys, but they clearly position them like a notch below. Like I think Drew and Walter are two guys that they have put real energy into giving them some big wins, giving them the world title, like having them feud with their top guys. It's not like they're being buried, but they're very clearly positioned as like B level top stars. And the A level top stars are your Cenas, your Reigns, your Punk, your Rhodes, those guys. And a lot of those guys aren't that reliable. So,
And
going,
that's so dangerous as well because that's that stagnation on top that you tend to see companies kind of hit the kind of downside from. And it was the same problem that they had, if you think about it, in the early 2010s that allowed for New Japan to step up and eventually
mhm,
the creation of AEW because, they didn't create A-level talent. So they had like the Cenas that they wanted on top and then they were literally and they wanted to have Roman, but that was it. Like so they didn't push Punk to that level, which eventually left was one of the reasons that he left the company.
mhm.
They didn't push Daniel Bryan to that level, which incensed fans so much that so many of them turned their back on the company. And I'm sure you can think of other examples within that. Even if into 2016, you look at Dean Ambrose. That was another one where they could have done more with him. He was the best talker in the Shield by a long way really had a fan spot, and they didn't. And by 2019, he was in a position where he wanted to leave for AEW, but also where his drawing power and that character in WWE was completely shot. He's doing meet and greets at the Royal Rumble with 40 people, so it's like, yeah, you cannot fall back into that. And I think that's something that they didn't really do so much in when they were getting hot in kind of 23, 24, because it felt like you were putting people on the top and you were treating your current people, like your people on the way up, as important or more important in the past, and they seem to have reverted back, which is not uncommon, is it? It's so funny in a way how cyclic wrestling is, as in like we seem to then to extend the kind of peak, we then run back to the past, and then we end up in the same problems that
I
we had
can't
before.
believe I can't believe that the guy who spent his entire career working for Vince McMahon and learning under Vince McMahon would take creative control and have very similar issues and philosophies towards Vince McMahon. It's so shocking.
It
Um,
is for sure.
so another media story. Do you remember that week in time? Uh, it was a very important week in wrestling this year, where just for some reason, pretty much every wrestling news site decided that
Hmm.
all people wanted to do was hear about what Killer Cross was going to do and what he was up to and what he was gonna what was going on with his contract. Is he going to leave WWE? Is he going to re-sign with WWE? Does he have a W offer? What's he going to do next? What's he saying? And there was this period of time where and I will point out that the Observer and Post Wrestling were the only two major sites when I looked into this that didn't really provide us with relentless coverage of this. But there was a period of time where just Karrion Kross became the most important person in wrestling. If you were, on wrestling social media and looking at, aggregator sites and seeing if you were to Google like wrestling news on Google, you're just seeing a ton of Karrion Kross PR. And the reason I bring it up is I think it really exposed the way that the wrestling media operates in a lot of ways, which is clearly Karrion Kross himself or people close to him had a very good relationship with a lot of people that are newsbreakers in wrestling media. And there's no way that like there is enough general interest in Karrion Kross for like SEO purposes to have like 10 Karrion Kross stories a day. And I'm not exaggerating with that total on some of these sites um, about what he was going to do. There's no way that was actual interest to justify that. This was media doing something for someone they're friendly with, who's probably been a source for them in the past. And I just bring it up as it's something that maybe a lot of people forgot, but I think it was really exposed, I think, the current wrestling media space and how the people that are running sites are not necessarily interested in what's the most informative news or even what's the most uh, the biggest news that we can get the most attention with. There's this interest in can we help our friend out who's in the wrestling industry? And sites have been doing this for years. When I worked for Wrestling Inc. for a long time, Raj was very friendly with Court Bauer, so we always had our MLW news, like even in the old MLW days, like in the mid 2000s, um, this happens across all of wrestling news for the most part. And I did think in like what is Karrion Kross, despite this just apparently massive surge of interest in what he was doing. What has he done since he's left WWE? He's basically disappeared off the face of the earth. I know he's worked a couple indie dates, and I think he's appeared in maybe MLW or something like that. But I think it was a really interesting time that I think opened up some eyes about what this wrestling media space is.
What I find most interesting about stories like that and when we see like that is how quickly kind of one follows the other. So, and I don't know if that's to do with algorithms, or I don't know if that's to do with the way that,
Hmm.
these places earn their kind of their keep essentially. But rather than there's a lack of independent thought. And you brought up like the Observer and Post not kind of jumping on it. And yeah, especially with Post, well, I'll talk about Post particularly, but it's like they really don't do that. They path their own way. They build their own community by offering different things than what others do. And it's not just built on clicks or anything like that. So they're able to do that, and they trust in the value of their content. And I'm not sure how many other outlets tend to do that now. It's very much like that 24-hour rolling news cycle that they're all indebted to. Then rather than having things where we discuss the value of them, or we look at like the content underneath, or we have to look at something that has depth and that might require more explaining, or things that may not be kind of is easy for everybody to comprehend, that we've definitely ran towards things that are kind of like, oh, let's keep up with this. It's like shock news. It's like entertainment. It's like things that you throw on, like you see a video on Instagram and you don't see it the next day. And I don't know what the value is of it, because it might be a story that you follow for a week, but then it's gone. And what did you learn? What is the value of this? What is the value to your outlet in being kind of a subsidiary to this wrestler that's, I get it, he's trying to create buzz, so fair play to him because it worked for him for a bit. It hasn't got him anywhere, but in terms of the attention, like, you would have thought he was the most important person on the planet. We deliberately did talk about it because we were just like, I'm not talking about that, like, what is this?
No, I mean, there's a lack of people with real news experience working in wrestling media, which I talk about all the time. Like, I get PR releases all the time from people that desperately want news coverage, but I also know it's not really relevant to my readership. People aren't going to read this. So like
Yeah.
we're just not going to dedicate time to this. I think there's a number of problems with wrestling media. The first being the lack of experience people have. The other being just we got a lot of people, a lot of sites pay by the post. A lot of people sites pay
Yeah.
by the word, or so they're looking at these people that are working for aggregators have quotas to meet. So this is an easy thing. If Karrion Kross sends you a press release or sends you an email or something like that about something like that, or he's trying to work an angle, you can go with that. Just like you would go with that with any wrestler reached out to you. I also think that you mentioned a good point, like, is this like kind of people following things? If Fightful is running stories on Karrion Kross, is that being picked up by other smaller news outlets? Being like, well, if Fightful's covering it, we should cover it. And I think the reason Post in the Observer site, although we'll talk about the Observer in a second, uh, the reason maybe they didn't cover it that much was because the people that are running those sites maybe have a little bit more knowledge about, is this really newsworthy? Or is this something that we want to do? Or if it is, a 19-year-old aggregator whose job is to look at Fightful every day and then post whatever that Fightful's posting.
Well, that's the point that you've hit on that drives
Hmm.
me absolutely insane, and it's the rise of aggregation. So rather than people consuming their news through kind of getting more detailed content or trying to actually find the whole story, there is this rise of consuming your news through somebody's interpretation of a story in,
Yeah, and not even
120
going.
characters, you
Yeah.
know?
Not
Um,
even going to like an aggregator, you at least go to the site and might read, a several paragraph story.
yeah.
But now it's like, oh, what did Dave say in the Observer? Oh, let me see what this news aggregator on Twitter is saying, and it doesn't have any context. They might get it wrong. They might
They
get it
do
wrong.
get it
Nobody
wrong.
cares. Nobody cares if they get it wrong. They could have
There's literally a
information.
story. There's
Yeah.
a story in the last week that drove me absolutely insane because they added some words to it and it changes the entire concept
Mhm.
of what actually was said, and it is absolutely incorrect. But that's constant now, and this is what
But
you're kind of fighting
if you have,
against.
I'm sorry, I gotta get angry about this. If you have no journalism experience, if you have no proper news experience, you're gonna do that shit all the time. You're gonna get stuff wrong. You're not
Mm.
gonna read it like it's. I believe that it's honest mistake when people are devoid of the context of this. I don't think it's malicious, but what it is it's people who have absolutely no news writing experience, not understanding when you put that information out there, why it might be problematic if it's positioned like this, or it's framed like that, or you leave out this paragraph, or you leave out this little tiny detail. People don't understand that. I mean, in my job, like I get a quote from somebody, I don't just write the quote down. I have to write a paragraph before explaining the quote so that people
Hmm.
understand the context of what they're talking about. So it's not just random words that people can take in a million different ways. And I'm just, there's a lack of professionalism there that I see all the time.
And I think there's not the infrastructure to learn or encouraged, That's where I put it. So, for example, I've spoken a little bit about this, but I am attempting to learn more about journalism and study it. And, because I want to be better in how I communicate, I want to be able to communicate more clearly in terms of writing or, speaking in that aspect. But that's not a common thing because it's not something that's encouraged. This is a very much like we don't pay. This is not about career opportunities in a sense. It's not structured. I don't want to say like a real industry, but it's not ineffectively, is it? So we don't have that structure to encourage people to develop into actual journalists. And that's what worries me in a way is when you look at, if someone like Dave or Wade Keller steps away, or John Pollock or Brandon First, who have we got to kind of come up and replace them? Or do we become completely reliant on this aggregated kind of news that is just portraying whatever message it wants to portray? And
Hmm.
people are so willing to believe this stuff without actually going and reading the stories as well. It's also about how we kind of, get information or like find these sort of things, or whether we want to look all in depth. So it's kind of a dual thing. But yeah, it does worry me that I don't see enough where people are willing to kind of help others to develop either. And yeah, the rise of aggregation and how much that's actually become in a way bigger than the actual people breaking the news,
Yeah.
is
And this
a
is
thing that really worries me.
it's true across a lot of mediums. It stands out in wrestling because of the lack of mainstream
Hmm.
established media that
Yeah.
has much higher standards and has actual professionals working on it. Um, but yeah, I mean, we have a media literacy problem. We have an
Hmm.
issue where we have a lot of people in this world that are very hostile towards journalists based on principle. And
Yes.
that's, we live in the world where many people, wrestling fans, believe a wrestler saying something more than they will believe Dave Meltzer saying something, despite the fact
Yeah,
that,
there's that tendency to shout fake news in every medium at the moment.
yeah,
It's incredibly damaging.
you're telling me. Um, and lastly, this is my last topic I have.
Sure.
And it is about the Observer. And just, I think this is a really big story that like no one else is going to cover. So I'll say it here. Like
Cool.
the decline of the Wrestling Observer newsletter and particularly the site and
Mm.
its reliability as a source of information and whatever is going on there, whatever's going on with Dave and Brian. And they're clearly, we don't know the numbers, but we can tell that they're clearly losing subscribers.
Hmm.
They're constantly, trying to get. I'm not a subscriber anymore. I stopped subscribing, I think, at the end of last year or maybe early this year. They're constantly trying to get me back to the Observer, with all their promotional deals and stuff like that. Um, their aggregation on their site is becoming worse and worse, seemingly by the day. I remember yesterday someone pointed out that like on their news they had like six different stories that were just from some podcast Lana was on talking about various things, and it was like. And it's very, very difficult because I have nothing too bad. I have nothing really to say about the actual Observer newsletter itself or what Dave is saying in the Observer right now. I don't think that's as much of an issue, but the whole F4W site, um, it is the place to go if you're a serious wrestling fan that wants to hold news to like a certain standard. And the fact that I feel like it's really going into decline, I think. Um, what they're choosing to cover, what um, they cover via audio, like the consistent coverage of really it's just AEW and WWE at this point. Very little coverage of non WWE or AEW wrestling. Um, and I think it's worth monitoring, and it's something that's really like worrying to me as a wrestling fan that this is site that for a long time has been this staple for me is something that I no longer feel is that important. Um, I don't listen to Observer Radio anymore. That's the reason I canceled my subscription. Like I was like, I used to listen to this multiple times a week, and now like I don't care because it's like reviewing WWE, uh, Dave like Brian being totally checked out, Dave not wanting to be critical of anything, a lot of ratings and business talk every week, which I find maddening, as I said earlier. It's just not for me anymore, and that's a problem. I should be the person that Wrestling Observer Radio is for because I'm a sicko weirdo that loves pro wrestling. Um, and I have immense respect for Dave. It just feels like this is a site that's really, really going into decline, and their business is reflecting that, unfortunately.
I will start with the fact that I cannot use their site currently on my phone or on Chrome. I have to use Microsoft Edge, which I don't use for anything. So if you want to talk about technical issues, that's probably a quite big one. I know that's been raised and kind of fobbed off a little bit on the board as well. But yeah, I think there's a few things for me on this. So the first one is I think they have taken some brand damage in terms of the constant campaigns around them and you know around their trustworthiness,
Hmm.
and there hasn't been enough to kind of counteract that or fight back. And some of that is quite malicious. Some of the wrestlers that use it for like hype or that quick 5 minutes, I don't think they realize the damage that they're doing. And you can say that
Hmm.
you want to undermine the dirt sheets and that sort of stuff,
Yep.
but if you keep undermining people that are actually kind of trying to put out factual information, then all you're left with is just garbage, and that will long term be far more damaging than you think. Uh, yeah, it's difficult. I think we talked a lot about wrestling stagnation at top when we talked about WWE's thing, but also I think this is a period of time now where things are changing, and your product and the way that you present it has to reflect that. So you need to diversify, and that means that you need to diversify how you're talking about things. So when it comes to, look, I like numbers. We're on different wavelengths on that. You know that. But for me, I always think that now with the way that we have things, the most important things is trying to explain the context and explain what these things actually mean or don't mean, rather than just repeating numbers to no end. So I think you've got to look more at doing that. And yeah, you've got to diversify your offering. Things are different, they're changing. I pointed a post earlier because I look at like their wrestling cafe, and it's not just about wrestling, is it? They've got a community element. They do like film reviews and stuff and that sort of thing. So they have something different in their offering. Well, it doesn't even need to be that. Like, are you covering, there's so much more wrestling that's accessible, that as much as most of your kind of listener base maybe prioritize AEW or WWE, in order to kind of sustain a base, you also need to be, it doesn't even need to be a war or anything like that, but you need to be covering more of, the Japanese promotions, European promotions, independent promotions, and that helps the whole entire scene when you're kind of doing that, and it gives people more opportunity, because you are going to go through times as a wrestling fan where you might love a company, you might hate them, you might fall out of, like, feel like I'm not invested in wrestling or anything like that. And sometimes one of the biggest things like that happens that kind of keeps you as a fan is that you get into something else. You become engrossed in something, you learn about it, it becomes this kind of fascinating thing. And that's where we found a disconnect for me, is like, especially as it's a joke to these days because everyone thinks it's not, but it's true. But it's primarily a Japanese wrestling fan. It's very difficult to sometimes listen to the coverage to some of these shows and either hear a minute or things that are like not always accurate, or feel like they're disconnected from actually if you're watching on a regular basis. And let's be honest, for us at Social Suplex, it also gives us an opportunity. And I think there's other places that are looking at that, and you think, how can we be different? How can we provide for those people that previously would have looked to the Observer for these kind of long forms, or looking at this promotion or that promotion, which is now longer coverage. So there's an opportunity there for people like us, and it's whether you want to take that opportunity or not. But yeah, it's difficult to see, and I don't know what the solution is at the current time. I think there has to be change. I think that's most modern businesses, isn't it? The way that you speak to your customers, or I was going to say passengers, that's because the railway, right? But the way that we speak to our customers, everything has to change because the world is changing. You can't just offer the same product, and especially at an increased price, and expect the same sort of loyalty. So you have to have more. You have to change the way that you talk to people. You have to change kind of what you cover. You have to change, the viewpoints, and it needs to. For me, this is a big thing. I'm not saying that I'm some big head honcho or something, but the way I look at what we're doing is I like having as much variation in terms of the backgrounds and the people speaking as possible, because you're trying to attract all these people. The days of we as wrestling, as content creators, whatever you want to call us, only speaking to one demographic or one set of people, that should be long gone. The whole idea, I think, now is to make your kind of your site or your offering more representative of, and I'm talking about cumulative because each podcast is different, right? You can have who you aimed at, but if you have a cumulative offering, the idea is to be more representative of all the people that are watching. And that's why when I look at Social Suplex and I look at something like Tunnel Talk, it's like that's the sort of thing that you need in order to attract a new demographic. Because if you're losing your previous demographic, what are you replacing them with? And I don't see that there. So
Well, just not to cut you off, but to kind of tie that in real quick, like the insistence on like just consistent over the top WWE coverage, where it's like we're going to review every WWE show, we're going to have all this discussion about WWE, and it's at the same time, it's a very tribal atmosphere. Like WWE and the people that are fans of WWE often like use Dave as a punching bag, and the Observer's full of lies, and all of that kind of stuff like that. And um, it's like so those hardcore WWE fans that are into watching every show and wanting to listen to reviews of every show, like those people, not all of them, but a good portion of them, like have really like poisonous feelings towards the Observer and Dave Meltzer. So it's like that's the audience you're catering towards.
They are far more likely to subscribe to Fightful than they are to the Observer.
Well, that's part of the Fightful business model, which is to be the WWE friendly version of the Observer. Yeah. Despite the fact, also by the way, that if you ever read the Observer or listen to Dave talk, it's relatively lacking of criticism towards WWE in a lot of ways. And I think like you mentioned, like the damage their reputation has taken over the years from wrestlers, and to me, this is on wrestlers and it's on like other media members
Hmm.
need to stand up for like Dave's reputation and agree. Like I'll be the first person to criticize Dave, but also like Dave takes so much unnecessary, non-factual shit from people. And he's got an army of washed grifters who have made bashing Dave a part of the major part of their identity. Um, and the people, Dave can defend himself all he wants, and oftentimes he's not really interested in defending himself. Um, but it's on other people to point out. It's like this guy is like the most important wrestling historian of all time. This person is the reason a lot of people are interested in pro wrestling to the degree that we are in is due to Dave's tireless work for decades and decades.
Hmm.
And um, most of the time when people criticize him that you see publicly, it's for bullshit. Um, and the fact that we live in a world where wrestlers, oh, I'll just bury Dave. That'll be a quick way to get some attention on
Yep.
myself. Or if I don't want that news out there, I'll just say Dave's a liar, and everyone knows he's a liar, and people will believe that. And it's up to the people outside of the Observer, like other members of the media, to stand up and say like, this is not true. Dave is a reputable person, because that damage has been done to his brand. And Dave doesn't always help himself. Like Dave is really
No.
interested. He's really invested in being on Twitter and arguing with people that have absolutely no interest in listening to him. And we've had that, that's something that's been discussed a lot. It's like Dave shouldn't be on Twitter, or if he's on Twitter, he should just be dropping out, dropping fact knowledge. And
Yeah,
I,
you
I,
learn you learn your lesson on
but I
that. I
do think,
think.
and I think it's changed his analysis to a degree. I think he's way less critical of things than
Hmm.
he used to be. And I don't know if that's because he's tired of getting shit from people behind the scenes, or he's tired of getting dragged on social media. And I remember I read his write up of Aaron Wolf from a couple of weeks ago, where he was really, really
Hmm.
critical of
Hmm.
Aaron Wolf's like performance when he was doing like a run in or whatever.
Yeah, Gifu, yeah.
Yeah, and saying that,
Yeah.
he didn't expose charisma, he didn't show any of this like, and Dave used to write about people like that
Goku.
all the time. If you go back and read any Observer, he's talking about all the time. My favorite Dave thing he's ever written ever was when he was talking about he was reviewing WrestleMania 9, right?
Hmm.
Which one was Sid versus Hogan? Is that 9 or 8? That's WrestleMania. No, that's WrestleMania 8. He's reviewing
I was
WrestleMania
saying
8.
9 is the
It's
Bret
the
Hart
Las Vegas.
Yokozuna, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Las
Yeah.
Vegas one. So WrestleMania 8. He's reviewing the Hogan Sid match, and he writes about Sid. He says, "Sid is like a Christmas present with the world's greatest wrapping paper, but the box is empty." Uh, and like to
Excellent.
me, that's Dave. Like that's analysis. That's his opinion. That's critical insight from somebody whose viewpoint I trust. That's really what I want to get out of, especially the Observer these days. The way the news cycle works. Like there's news in the Observer, but we mostly hear about stuff. Mostly what we're getting is we're getting an. I wanted analysis out of it, and the fact that
Hmm.
he went in on Aaron Wolf and like he went hard on Aaron Wolf, and I thought he was maybe a little too harsh on Aaron Wolf, but I was like, man, Dave never writes like people about people these days like that. Like he would never write about an NXT wrestler like that, or an AEW wrestler like that. And I don't know if that's because he doesn't want to get shit on social media. He doesn't want to get the wrestlers upset with him.
It's not just
Um,
that, it's the same with the booking as well. So there's
oh yeah.
times recently where you can see like he doesn't agree with this and he thinks it's bad, but it'll kind of walk around it, like we'll see what happens, or kind of like, we'll see in a few months, but you can tell, like, but you want him to just kind of be really honest about like, I think this is shit. This is why I think this is bad for business. Sorry for swearing.
Mhm. And
Um,
like Dave's greatest, like Dave should take a victory lap on this once a day, which he never will. But like Dave predicts the downfall of WCW. Dave,
mhm.
like if you read any Observer from 97 or 98, and he's right, if maybe he's reviewing a pay-per-view for WCW, and his analysis is always, this show did really good business. You can see,
Mhm.
look, they did so many pay attendant, they did a buy rate of X, and it was really impressive, and it was way up from last year. But if you look, it's the same names on top. We're not seeing progressive booking with some of these younger names getting
Oh,
exposure, and eventually that nostalgia with the NWO is going to wear off, and they need to go with someone else, and they're going to have different things to do. And he says that really consistently. And what happens with WCW? They completely collapse because they don't have any new stars. Their booking's really inconsistent. They don't, elevate new people to the degree they need to. They rely on the old stars for too long, and WCW collapses. And Dave's like 100% right about it. And it was so perceptive. And I always think like Dave doesn't write like that anymore. Like
it's funny
he'll
because
he'll
even
just
in
say, "Oh, the business was really well," and not touch that much on any other analysis. And it's like, Dave, you predicted WCW collapsing. Like anytime Bischoff wants to give you shit, Dave should just have some sort of like automatic response that just is like, well, I predicted that your booking would destroy WCW even when it's at its highest point. So I don't know, like that should be the victory lap of all victory laps he takes, but he doesn't,
Hmm.
and I don't think he writes like that anymore.
I think he'd even did in 2022. Like if you look at the AEW stuff, he was the one like who was
Hmm.
picking up like we were like their kind of on sale numbers in repeat markets were starting to really slip. He could see the issues coming with Punk, obviously that started in the spring, way before Double or Nothing, and he was warning about that. Like you could see that getting more and more in his writing. But I think since then, I don't know, maybe that's the kind of one of the big things. Like since kind of the All Out stuff, and that was one where he really got attacked, in the year after that.
Hmm.
That's where I feel like he stepped back from. So now, like with this WWE kind of, you could see that downturn coming. We were looking at Cena rescuing numbers last autumn and thinking, okay, that's interesting. But you could see this kind of coming to the end of their peak, and he's kind of not acknowledged it until now, and that's kind of feels really unusual. That would be something that you would have seen him do in the past. In September they were laughing at the idea of them being on a downturn soon. So yeah, that's I wonder how much that kind of all everything that was involved with kind of All Out and that had an effect on it. And also, it may be just in terms of the people that he communicates with. As you get older, your contacts get older, right? And if you're cut off from kind of the viewpoints of maybe the younger wrestlers or staffers and that sort of thing, and you're more connected to the people at the tops of the companies, and I would probably suggest that he's more connected to people at the tops of the companies than anybody, then your viewpoint becomes more shaped by what they say. And I see sometimes I'll hear an interview with Tony Khan, and then I'll see, I've heard things in the Observer or he's said things, and you can directly see the correlation. So, and I'm sure that's the same with Paul Levesque as well. But it's like, yeah, or whoever it is that he's in contact with WWE. But yeah, I think he's more influenced by what they tell him and how they talk to him than he would be potentially in the past as well.
You mentioned like in the Observer site overall, is like the lack of coverage outside of WWE and
Hmm.
AEW. Like I'll say right now, like when I was like reviewing topics for um this show, like what are the biggest news stories? Like people said like, oh, CMLL is doing really well, Stardom's doing really well, and like those are definitely like really important stories. Like just personally, like I don't know enough about those wrestling promotions to really talk about like what they're doing so well all the time. So and I don't want to
Okay.
pretend that I do, even
Hmm.
though I acknowledge that those are very positive and strong developments for the wrestling world as a whole in 2025. But to tie that into the kind of what you're saying, like with the Observer sites, like it's totally around two promotions, and like maybe you'll get like, oh, they watched TNA pay-per-view or something like that. But the fact that we have multiple reviews of WWE shows each week, and there's just not enough. There's so much wrestling out there, and there's just not enough discussion about it. I mean, their New Japan coverage is greatly reduced to what it used to be, and
Yep.
I get this is all a factor of another major wrestling promotion came in that you needed to cover and throw a lot of energy to covering. So I understand that we're not going to be like the Observer in 2025, and Observer Radio in 2025, and the Observer site in 2025 is not going to have the amount of time and attention to other wrestling promotions that it was in 2008 or 2018. Um, but it is kind of disappointing when you think about like I really got into I, New Japan because Dave was writing about it a lot. And I started reading the Observer and I started listening to Observer Radio and I was like, oh, I got to start watching this promotion and I got to get into this wrestler and all this stuff like came because Dave was this tastemaker in a lot of ways. And now it's like they talk about like big New Japan shows, but that's pretty much it. And maybe like a really major New Japan story. I mean, like basically little coverage of Noah, very little coverage of All Japan.
Hmm.
They might review like a couple Stardom shows a year, but that's it. Very little CMLL coverage again, kind of similar to Stardom. Like maybe they'll do like the Anniversario show, but there's little blurbs here and there from the Observer, but I don't even know if he's even watching some of this stuff. Like, it's disappointing to see somebody who historically has been so important in diversifying the interests of wrestling fans around the world spend so much of his time on two products, one of which is like an abhorrent product that's like offensive to hardcore wrestling fans.
I do love how you don't mince your words.
Who am I
I
mincing
really
my
do
words
enjoy
for?
it.
This is like I said, this
Oh,
is a
that's a good point.
podcast. This is a
Yeah,
podcast that like
fair play.
is just for me. Like ultimately that's what it's for. So
That's
like,
just my Britishness kicking
yeah.
in. This is the same thing with Sarah. Is like I just let it go because I'm just like, all right, okay. But yeah, no, it's yeah, you have a good point, and that's where if you don't have the time or you don't feel like you can cover it, then diversify the offerings by having other people that can. Is that would be my that's all I can say on that. That's how I feel on it. It's there are many things that I cannot cover. Like you talked about. I mean, I could cover Noah, but I can't cover Stardom. I like, realistically, there's plenty of Japanese promotions I can't cover. I'm not gonna ever be a great cover of CML. In fact, I'm far better at covering AAA, which is probably the weirdest thing about it. But that's the idea. Then we get people that can, and actually the more, and this is the thing, like how many opportunities could we offer people? And then because the other thing is that scary bit is Dave's not going to be around forever. He's in the twilight of his career. So it's like, who is going to be able to, cover things in this way and be a reputable source and provide, a strong level of wrestling coverage. And if we don't start producing these people, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's not
No
to,
one
that's
is,
not, that's not to take away
yeah.
from like the likes of John Pollock
Yeah.
and Brandon First and anyone like that, or like young people that are coming through that write really well, like Brian Zellum wrote an excellent article for the Torch last week, but he wrote for a post, but he's at the Torch. But it's like we're not seeing enough of that, and it's not like they have an obligation, observers, to do that, but you'd think they would be one of maybe the most invested in doing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, no one's like Dave is a one-on-one. Like, there's just not going to be a replacement for him.
No.
Like, you're right. It's going to be a collective effort. And I do think that in general, we're probably doing a better job than we give ourselves credit for in terms of trying to add different voices. But like,
Look, we're
Dave,
trying,
Dave is like a superhuman. Like, his superpower is that he
Mm.
writes a 80,000 word
Yeah, it's
newsletter
crazy.
every week that he just like empties out of his brain. Like that's like something that just is not going to be replicated. Like you produce a
No,
newsletter yourself, and it's
it's
pooling
hard.
different
Yeah, it's
resources.
hard, and it's
Yeah.
hard, and it's hard, and especially when everyone has, other jobs, they have lives, they have things and commitments, and you have to balance that. And I think we've worked out how hard it is, and we worked out like how insane it is that he does that on a weekly basis. To be honest with you,
Yeah, it's
um,
like like I said, it's like Dave is it's like literally like he has a superpower. Like
yeah,
there are some
for
people that are
sure.
better than at things, and Dave is he can sit and he can write these and it's not always the most concise writing and things like that, but that does it basically by himself.
Hmm.
And like you said, like my the CMLL and Startup as good examples of like wrestling products that I probably enjoy. If I took the time to really get invested in them, like other people have, I seems like the stuff that I do watch, I tend to enjoy. Um, but I'm just like I don't have like the capacity to do that. I personally I'm somebody that like really has to be really invested in whatever I'm doing. Like if I'm into something, I'm really into it. I'm not like casually a fan of it. And so it's like I don't know, I really like AEW, still keep up with New Japan. Like could I drop some of these things and pick up something else? Sure. But it's like I don't have the time to also have a life and a career and other interests
Yeah,
to like really get into Stardom and really get into CMLL the way that I'm into like AEW. Um and be able to like cover it at a standard that I want to have it at. So you have to diversify with
yeah,
people. Like and it's like it's the same thing. It's like, and it hurts like when like I parachute in and I'll watch really highly praised Stardom matches or really highly praised CML shows, and I'll always be like, yeah, that was pretty good. I didn't like it as much as the people who were talking about it, but I enjoyed it. But I obviously didn't like it because I don't have any emotional investment in these things at
hmm,
all. I'm parachuting
sure.
in. And I have to accept that. Like, there was a time in my life where I was annoyed where, like, if there was wrestling out there that people were talking about that I didn't know about, I'd be like, oh, I gotta watch it. I gotta be, I feel like I'm missing out. And as I've gotten older, I've accepted, like, I'm just not gonna be able to watch everything. Like, and also maintain, like, any other interests or social life that I have. Like,
It's hard to accept sometimes that not everything can be about wrestling. But
well,
it
everything
is.
is about wrestling. I talk about this in my real job all the time, where like I just say because everything is
Uh,
wrestling. Um,
well, maybe it is. Yeah, we are joking about how everything can be tied to wrestling, watching the Formula One on Sunday. But yeah, maybe
well,
it
you
is.
must use I use wrestling terms all the
Oh yeah,
time in real
yeah.
life. Like I use probably buried is the biggest one. Like anytime, like I that is totally in my lexicon to the degree that I like. I'm like people must say buried. I say buried and put over all the time, like as for as verbs and stuff like that.
I
Like
think
I
I say
buried this.
sold a lot. I think I say sold a lot. Oh, you
Yep.
sold that. I'm
Yep.
sure I use that one far too often. But
Yeah.
I'm in a workplace where people know like this stuff that I'm doing. To scare it as hell if they give me more criticism than anyone else in a good way, you know. But also like they'll come and ask me about it. They're like fascinated, and I don't think that's the same for everybody. So I feel kind of lucky in that aspect that I can
Anyone
talk
that's
about it.
ever followed me on social media will know that. Like, if you follow me like on Blue Sky now, like my and Twitter is the same way. Like, I just tweet about wrestling. That's like what I do. It's
Mm,
my Blue Sky Twitter account. Of course, I'm a media member in these different communities for my real job, and people will find me and they'll follow me. And then I'm never gonna tweet about the town I'm covering or the issues I'm covering.
mm.
I'm just talking about wrestling because you know what? This is my wrestling thing. In hindsight, I probably should have had like a pen name and have a different wrestling personality and whatever than my separate real job. But that ship has sailed a long time ago. Um, and people who I work with will come up to me and they'll be like, "Yeah, you seem really interested in like pro wrestling because they just follow me on social media and just all it is for wrestling. I have no other interests like that." And they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm kind of into it," and like it's never like that hostile. Although I'm waiting for the time where someone I get a big piece of media criticism where it's like this guy's not covering this huge issue because he's just talking about wrestling. And I'm like, that'd be kind of funny when that happens.
It's an interesting thing about how it kind of comes into real life. But I do say, and I say all the time, is like the best thing for wrestling for me is the people that you meet through it and the relationships that you establish and how people feel like they're part of a community. And I think anywhere, whether it's media or whether it's companies themselves, anyone that can kind of play into that is the ones that end up being the most successful. You know, it's feeling like belonging is very powerful in a medium which is often kind of ostracized. And that's something that I always kind of think back to, especially when I think of like this year. I think of like Tokyo Dome weekend, I think of like All In weekend, and they're the kind of things I come away with more than the actual product in some ways, is like the feeling of being able to enjoy something together. And that's something maybe we don't focus on enough. But yeah, and that's the same with like listening to things. You know, when you listen to like coverage of something, you know, there was nothing better. Like when I tell a story when I first met Sarah, like the first thing we used to do is actually listen. This is totally sad, but we used to listen to the Observer, like and like, you know, we type out, we do like recaps for other people. We might be discussing it, and it was like a big thing. And maybe that's something that we don't feel when it like bring it back to the Observer in the same way now. We don't have that kind of discussion point. It doesn't feel like something like it's like, oh, you know, we're looking forward to investing our time in it because we're really into this thing and because that's how much we're into pro wrestling. And maybe that's something I don't know. You can't recreate that. I don't know how you do that, but that's probably from my personal perspective when it comes to the Observer, that would probably be something that I feel has changed.
I know you have a number of things to plug. You want to plug them here?
Oh God, yeah. I'm terrible at closing, so I'll do my best, and I'll be told off for it later, I'm sure. But yeah, if you want to follow me, I'm trying to do less social media because it's harder as you start to do more other things. But you can find me on Blue Sky at Trish Speirs 48, which is Jacob's Grom's number. Never changed it, never going to. You can find us on X at Trish and Sarah. And you can find our podcast, Trish and Sarah podcast, out every 2 weeks, including this coming Sunday on anywhere you listen to podcasts, as well as everything else on the Social Suplex Network. And you can find our Social Suplex newsletter at socialsuplex.com, including some of the best coverage of Japan that you will find anywhere, as well as coverage from around the wrestling world. Features, some great features on the 5-star Grand Prix in Stardom and Millie McKenzie this week, and lead articles where I just cause trouble when it's me.
Yes, we
But
talked about this earlier. We joked about this earlier on the show, but Trish wrote a very well written and documented article talking about Hiroshi Tanahashi's final opponent and the kind of political struggle between is it going to be Shinsuke Nakamura? Is it going to be Kazuchika Okada? How much is WWE involved? How much is AEW involved? And the kind of political machinations behind the scenes that people can check out.
yeah, thank you. I think there's huge value to long form still if you get it right and having all that context. And it was very hard to aggregate apparently, which I really liked. So that's great. But
Uh,
no, yeah, that's where you can find me, and you can find all our work at Social Suplex.
All right, thanks for coming on the show. I think Sarah might be upset because I met Sarah for the first time like 2 weeks ago at Dynamite. And she's like, "Why did you ask Trish to be on the show and not me?" After we met. But we'll have her on soon.
Yeah, I told her today. I was like, "Oh, I'm doing." She's like, "That's really cool." But no, I'm very lucky to work with someone that I just enjoy talking to. It's not a business thing. It's not a thing for clicks. We just enjoy talking wrestling, and when it comes down to it, that's what we do. So yeah, there you are. But yeah,
All
thank
right.
you very much for having me on your podcast, for probably turning everyone off in the first 10 minutes talking about championship football. But no, much appreciated.
This
Always
this
enjoy
whole
talking to you,
podcast
Jesse.
could have been a this whole podcast could have just been a football podcast.
It could, yeah. I
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like that's why you want me on, is like you just want to talk football. I don't blame you. I'm kidding.
Yeah, pretty much anybody from the Ireland or the UK that's been on the show. We've had at least one soccer, as we call it here, soccer, or as my dad calls it, soccer. Um,
Oh
is
God.
uh is really primarily what I want to do. All right, well, thanks a lot, Trish. Thanks to everyone who's been listening, and I'll talk to you again after a while.
My name is Tyler Fornes, and I am one of the co-hosts of the Good, the Bad, and the Hungy AEW podcast here on the Voice of Wrestling Podcasting Network. We take a broad scope approach to the world of All Elite Wrestling and the entire universe of Tony Khan. We talk about the big matches, the big stars, the promos, the storylines, and we also look at it from a big picture perspective. How are things going to change over the course of the next 10 years with AEW still in the picture? How are companies like WWE going to adapt and adjust to AEW? Are they going to be a similar way like they did with WCW in the late 1990s? Will there be a counterpunch? We talk about all of that and more on The Good, the Bad, and the Hungy every week on the Voice of Wrestling Network.
Hello, do you like New Japan Pro Wrestling? Are you a Shin Nihon freak? If so, check out the Super J-Cast with Joel and Damon on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.
And even if you fucking hate New Japan Pro Wrestling, listen to the Super J-Cast anyway. Not just for our great show reviews, analysis, and pastrami sandwiches, but there's also usually some dick jokes somewhere in the obligatory opening 30 minutes of absolute nonsense we chat about every single week. That's the Super J-Cast for all the best talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, crisps, and pornography.